So for this outer div, we'll make this flex call, gap 3 to give it that vertical layout. First things first, we'll do the title. We'll make this in H3 here, and this will just be the title. So we'll say class name. We want it to stick out. We'll say text SM, font semi-bold, and then let's do text foreground, which should just be the opposite of background. So if the background is black, the foreground should be white. And for the title, for each stop, we have this title right here, which makes everything super simple. So all we have to do is in here, we have already data. We're going to say data.title. Now that we have the title, we'll make the div for the gradient bar. So we'll say div, and actually this div is not going to be an open and closing tag. It'll just be a self-closing element. This div is where we're going to use the gradients that we just calculated up here. To do that, all we have to do is say style, just like this, double brackets, make some space for it, and we're going to say background, and we want this background to be the actual gradient. To do that in raw CSS, we can say something like linear dash gradient, parentheses. We'll make it go from left to right. So we'll say to right. And then here, we can actually pass in our gradient stops. All this is saying is make the background color of this div a linear gradient that goes from left to right. And here we give it the calculated gradients. And for some more styling here, let's throw a class name on this div. And we will just give it, let's say width full, so it takes up the entire width of the legend, rounded XL, give it a bit of a border. We'll do the same border that we're doing for the actual outer. So we'll do a border and border accent 70. And now this should be good to go. If I go ahead and save it, it looks like it's not quite showing up. Let's give it a defined height first. So let's say, I don't know, height 6. And now if we save it, we should see the gradient up here. It's a bit hard to see it on this white on black here. So let's change it to something like pressure. And here you can see the gradient much more obviously. If I go to precipitation, same thing. Temperature, this one's probably the best looking gradient in my opinion. But this is essentially what it will look like. The very last thing is just to get the values at the very bottom here underneath this gradient div. For the sake of simplicity, we'll just use the first and last values. So underneath the gradient here, for example, for precipitation, we would just show 0 on the far left side and then 140 on the far right side. To do that, all we have to do is make a new div here. Let's give it a class name of flex, justify between to space them out between the left and the right sides. And then for the text of these, let's just make it text SS. We want it to be pretty small. And then we'll say text foreground. Same thing. If it's against a black background, the text right here will be this white foreground color. And inside of here, for both our first and our last, we'll make each one a span. So we'll say span for the first one, span for the last one. First one is obviously just going to be data.stops at 0. That's the very first one. And we'll get that value. And then the other one will just be a very similar thing, but we'll get the very last one. So it's data at data.stops.length -1. And now this span should have the very first value, and this span should have the very last value. And after each one, we'll just also have another expression here that just does data.unit separated by a space here. We'll add that to both of these. Oops. Add that to both. And if we go ahead and save it here, now we have the units on the legend. So we can see the far left is -65 and the far right is 30. And now our legend is good to go. We're completely done with this component. A little bit of calculation up here, a little bit of styling, but nothing too bad. And now we got a nice looking legend that applies to each different map type that we can use, not only to make our map look a little cooler, but also to make it make a bit more sense. Now that we have this nice looking map and the nice looking layers for the different map types, and we have the map legend, let's finally put this map away for a second. I think we're done working on it for now. Let's move on to something else. I think at this point in the video and at this point in the app building process, the next thing we should probably take care of is these skeleton loaders. Right now, when we go to anywhere on a map and we just click, notice how the data kind of sits at what it is already before it just flashes to the new data. So if I'm, somewhere in India and I go and click somewhere in Saudi Arabia here, the data stays still for a second and then just shifts. There's not really any sort of visual indication that we're fetching new data. If you're not familiar with what a skeleton loader is, they're basically just some indication that your data is loading or fetching from some API or backend instead of using a loading spinner. If I go to the shadcn documentation here, they actually have a skeleton component and it looks something like this. And I'm sure you've seen this before on other websites. This dimming and flashing behavior that we're seeing is what we actually call the skeleton loader. And it should generally match the shape that your data will be in, and it looks way cleaner than doing a loading spinner. Because if, for example, on our app, we went somewhere here, and we clicked on some, I don't know, some area of the map, and then we had a loading spinner on each card, and then the data suddenly flashed in, that still doesn't look very clean. However, having skeleton loaders and transitioning from a skeleton loader to the actual data should look way smoother. With that being said, there's a reason why in all of our cards on the dashboard, like for example, the current weather, hourly forecast, whenever, I made these all suspense queries instead of regular use queries. If you have a component that uses use suspense query, you can wrap that entire component in the built-in suspense component in React, which will allow you to have a fallback component, meaning the component that is rendered while we're waiting on the data to fetch. If we do our skeleton loaders the correct way, our skeleton components would be our fallback, and then once the data is loaded in, it uses the actual component. What this means is that the skeleton component should effectively match exactly the actual component in terms of shape and the way it looks. But wherever there should be information, we would just have that pulse animation going to show that it is loading, like how we have here. For example, if we go to our current weather card, the skeleton loader for this card would probably still say current weather here, but where we actually have text for the actual card like this that comes from the API, we would replace it with a skeleton loader until the data is actually there. The easiest way to do this, in my opinion, without completely muddying the components that we already have, would be to create brand new skeleton components that mimic the real ones in the way that I just mentioned. So we'll go inside of our file explorer here, and inside of components, I'm going to make a new folder that I would just call skeletons. And then in here, we want to make a component for each card. So for example, for the current weather, we'll make a new component that we'll just call it current skeleton.tsx, just like this. And we'll do the same for the daily forecast, the hourly forecast, and the additional info. So we'll go ahead and make those. We'll say this one is hourly skeleton.tsx. This one is daily skeleton.tsx. And then this one will be additional info skeleton.tsx. And then for each of these, we're just going to run tsrfc to get the base component out. Do that for all 4 of these. And what we'll do here is actually pretty simple. So for each of these cards, how we're going to make the skeleton is we're going to go into whatever card you want to make. So we'll start with the current weather. So we'll go current weather card. And we basically want to take literally all of this JSX exactly, because we want these components to look pretty much the same. We're going to take it exactly, copy it, and we're going to paste that in here to our skeleton. We'll make sure to import the card and then also the weather icon. And now we should have an exact copy of the current weather. However, we know that in the skeleton, we're not going to have access to this data yet. So what we're going to do to create these skeleton loaders is everywhere in this component now where we see data, we're going to replace that with a skeleton loader. For the skeleton loader, just like the dropdown, we're going to get that component from shadcn instead of having to write our own custom version. So it'll be this component exactly. So to add it to our project, we can run this command right here, same as the select. We'll take it, go ahead and add it to our terminal here. And now, once this runs, we should, now if we close this, look in our file explorer in the UI folder, now we have this skeleton.tsx component. So we can use that in each of our skeleton loaders. Now we'll use this component and go through every single spot in this component that has data and replace it with a skeleton loader. So for example, this first header 2, we're going to replace this, just delete it, and replace it with a skeleton component. And we'll want to make sure that it's an accurate size as to what our temperature text would be normally. So we'll try adding a class name on it, and let's throw width 50, height 4 on here. And we'll just rinse and repeat this for each thing that has data. So for example, this weather icon also has data. So let's take this, let's copy and replace the weather icon here. The weather icon was already hard coded to be size 14. So we'll say size 14 for this. And then we'll also give it rounded full to make it appear circular. This header 3 also consumes data, so let's replace this with a skeleton. We'll make this one slightly smaller in width than the top one. We'll do with 30 here instead of 50. We'll take this skeleton right here. We'll replace this H3 with that. And then we'll do the same for each of our P tags down here. We'll just replace all of them as such. And now we're not consuming data anymore in this component. Everywhere where we had data, we replaced it with a skeleton loader. Now what we'll do so we can see this is go back to our app over here. Let's go ahead and save this file. And now we'll go back to app. And before we wrap this in a suspense and get the actual fallback stuff working correctly, let's render them out side by side just so we can see a visual comparison. And you can kind of get an idea of what I'm doing. So I'm going to render it out right under here. We're just going to call it current skeleton like this. And again, it's a dumb component. It doesn't need any sort of data. So if we go ahead and save this now and look down, this is roughly what our skeleton loader would look like. And if you notice, looking between the two of them, that this actual weather card that has the real information looks to be a bit taller than the skeleton card, just because some of the stuff that's filled in just appears to be bigger. So let's actually go through each of these fields here and get the correct height and width so that we can go into our skeleton and adjust the width and height of each one. We can do that super easily if we just go into our dev tools here. Let's inspect and let's look through each thing here. So no matter what, even if we're kind of shrunk down like this, they should all still be the same width and height. So let's look at, for example, this header 2. It says that it's about 120 pixels in width and about 60 pixels in height. So the general rule of thumb with setting up widths and height in Tailwind is that if we take any sort of given pixel size, like 60, we can divide it by 4, and that's whatever the actual number should be for here. We want this to be 60 pixels tall, so for our skeleton, we would say height 15 because we divide by 4. For the width, it's about, let's just say it's 120. So 120 divided by 4 is 30. So we can say width 30. And then we'll just go through real quick and do this for each one. So it looks like that's fine. We know the weather icon is the correct size. For the scattered clouds here, looks like we have 28. So divided by 4 is 7. So we'll say this is height 7. And the width here is 150. So we'll say that's roughly something like 36. Now if we go ahead and save this, these should look a bit more accurate to what the actual size of them should be. If we go down and look at where the time is, let's open this up. You can see that the time here is about 150 in width and 40 in height. So that means we can give that a height of 10. And we said, what was the width there? 150. We'll do the same thing. We'll say width 36 there. Get that looking a bit more accurate. And now these look way closer in their actual size. The last thing would be these few fields down here at the bottom. So let's look at these real quick. We can see that each of these ones has 24 pixels in height, which that means 24 divided by 4 is 6. So each of these should be height 6. So we'll adjust all those to be 6 there. And then each of these will not make super wide. Let's just say, we'll say 64 for them, makes it kind of easy. So we'll say width 16 for all these. And now I think this should be good to go. If we go ahead and save it, close this now. Now our skeleton card approximates the actual card much closer. In fact, if we look in our dev tools and hover over this actual card here, it says that the height of it is 420. We hover over this card, it is also 420, so they're the exact same height, so I think we've got these sizes looking perfect. Now that we know this looks good, what we can do is we can go back to our app here, and instead of rendering out current skeleton like this, obviously we don't want to actually do this for the real thing, let's get rid of this. And the way we do this is, because current weather uses a suspense query, what we can actually do is highlight this whole thing, Control-Shift-P wrap. We're going to wrap this in a suspense component, and suspense is a component that is built in React. What this suspense component allows us to do is give it a prop called fallback, and what it means is that while this query is in flight, so whatever is using the suspense query, while it's in flight, meaning we don't have the data yet, we'll render whatever component we put inside fallback. So we can say for this one, we will just render out current skeleton. Essentially meaning, while this use suspense query is running, we're gonna render current skeleton. Once it's done running, we'll render the actual current weather card. If you're not super familiar with this suspense paradigm, that's understandable. I didn't start using it until more recently, but I think it is a really nice way of avoiding loading spinners without having to do like an is loading or is fetching state, and simply relying on the suspense query built in from Tanstack. It makes it really convenient to do. Because without using suspense, what you'd probably have to do if you had your query inside of it like this, is you would go in here, you would pull out something like is pending or is loading or whatever, and then in your JSX, you would conditionally say, okay, if we're pending or loading or whatever, then render a loading spinner, otherwise render the actual content. And that's fine, that works, but I do just think this suspense paradigm is pretty neat. It's a nice way of avoiding that, and it makes the code cleaner. So we'll go ahead and now save this file. And now one thing you're gonna notice is that whenever I go somewhere on our page, like let's say I jump around on over here, notice how we still don't render out the skeleton yet. It's still just having the current weather, and then it's flashing to the new card. The reason for that is because each of these cards that we're using right now, like the current weather, hourly forecast, etc., are all subscribed to the exact same query. And if one of them is wrapped in a suspense, but the others aren't, this suspense boundary is actually never going to trigger, because it'll see the other ones that already have a query, and it uses their cache data instead. So basically, before this is able to work like this, we actually need all of these cards to also be wrapped in suspense. So it's an all or nothing kind of thing, at least in this particular use case. What I can do to at least show you this though, is if I wrap all of these components in a suspense as well, like we have for the current weather. Let's go here, wrap all of these. Say wrap, suspense, and do the exact same here. Obviously, these ones right now need their own skeleton fallback, but for right now, let's just all render the exact same card, just so I can kind of show you what I'm talking about here. But if I now go ahead and save this, let's just refresh the page here, and I now go somewhere, notice how now it goes to the skeleton loaders. I'll kind of scroll down here so I can make you see this more. Click somewhere on the map, boom, that's what it would look like. So each time the query is in flight, it would go to the skeleton loader. Once it's done, it would load the actual card. Now, obviously, this looks kind of bad right now because they're all using the exact same skeleton loader, and they shouldn't be, but I think you get the idea. We have data on the page, then we click somewhere on the map to trigger a query again. While it's in flight, we render the skeleton loader. Once the data's in, we render the actual card. Skeleton loaders are becoming more and more common in apps I've seen recently, instead of just displaying a loading spinner. And in my opinion, they look really clean if they're done properly. The reason I made sure the skeleton loaders are the exact same size and layout and everything in the current weather card is because I think the instance where skeleton loaders don't look all that good is if the sizes are way off. If the sizes are way off between the actual card and the skeleton card, then every time I go and query for something, you're going to see a weird readjusting of sizes and a weird flickering on the page, which makes it look way less smooth. That's why it's important, if you're going to use skeleton loaders, you need to make sure that your sizes for your skeleton components are all pretty similar to what the real thing's going to be. That way it's just a better UI experience. Now that we have the proper skeleton loader for the current weather card, let's do the exact same thing, but for the other cards. So we'll go ahead and close out of current weather and current skeleton, and we'll follow the exact same process. So let's go into daily forecast here. We have all this JSX here that we're going to copy exactly. We're going to go into our daily skeleton, and we'll paste this in here, making sure to import card, and we'll import weather icon. And again, same thing in this component. We don't have access to data because it's a dumb skeleton component. So instead of mapping over data.daily, what we can actually do is we can map over an array of fixed length. The way I typically do that is by saying array.from. You can write object like this and say length, however long you want. We know it's an 8-day forecast, so we'll say length 8. And we're not going to have access to this day here. Obviously, it's going to be of type unknown here, so we can just completely get rid of it. We're not going to need that. And now, essentially everywhere where we use day, we're going to replace with the skeleton loader. So let's go back to our current skeleton real quick. Let's take this skeleton right here. We'll go ahead and just copy it. And let's paste it into the code here. We see that this p tag is already hard-coded to width 9, so we know that's easy to use. We can get the skeleton here, hard code this one to width 9. And then if we go ahead and go to our dev tools here, and we look at each of these items here to see kind of how tall and wide each of them are, this one is height 32, so divided by 4, that gives us 8, so we can say it's width 9 and height 8. The weather icon is also hard-coded to size 8, so we can replace this with a skeleton as well. Just give this one size 8, rounded full to make it appear to be a complete circle. And then if we look at our remaining 3 p tags down here, let's go here, inspect this, look at it, and these widths are going to vary slightly depending on what we have in here. But it looks like all of them are going to be also 32 pixels. So that's 32 divided by 8, or sorry, 32 divided by 4, which is 8. So these are all going to be skeletons with height 8. So let's actually just replace all these. Height 8, replace this here. And, oops. And we will also replace both of these. Again, each of these has a slightly variable width, but it does look like for each of them, the width is around 32 pixels. So we'll say the same thing for each of these. So instead of saying a separate width and height, we'll just hard code size 8 for each one of these things. So we'll do that for each one of these, what were p tags before. And the last thing to fix is we still need a key because we're mapping over something. We don't have day anymore. So let's actually just get the index out of here. So we'll just get the index just like this. And we'll make the key be the index. Normally, I'd advise against using index as keys in React. It's kind of a frowned upon thing. But if you're mapping over an array of fixed length like this, and you don't have any sort of ID to use, then index should be fine. And honestly, that's it. This component was super simple. So now if we go ahead and save this, let's go back to our app, and we can replace the fallback here of current skeleton, which is just a placeholder, with daily skeleton. Now for our daily forecast, while we're loading, we'll be rendering out the daily skeleton instead. What I'll do real quick just to show you how this looks, because it's a bit hard since it's kind of at the bottom here. I'm actually going to move this up a little bit. Move it up directly below our map. So if we go in here, click on somewhere, boom. You can see, it loads in pretty quick, so it doesn't last very long. But whenever we click somewhere, it loads, flashes in. It's the exact same size, so there's no weird layout shifting, which is exactly what we want. So now let's go ahead and move this back down below the hourly forecast. And let's move on to the next card. We'll take care of the hourly forecast. So we'll do the exact same process we've been doing. Close out of these. Let's close out of this. Actually, we'll keep it open for now. Let's go into hourly forecast. Take this JSX exactly. Again, same process. Just got to do it a few more times. Go here, replace it. We will get our card here. And now we'll just go through again, same exact thing. Anywhere that consumes data, we want to replace it with a skeleton loader. We know for this data to hourly, we don't have it. So let's do the same thing we did as the daily skeleton of mapping over an array of fixed length. So we'll say array from, it'll be length. We know this is a 48-hour forecast, so it'll be length 48. And we'll do the same thing here, where we will say, we'll get the index out. And then for each thing, we'll make sure that's the index there. And actually, I'm realizing because of this doesn't actually have a key on it, but it should. Don't forget that. This should just be, yeah, we can use this here. Say hour.dt. That's a little bit of an oopsies. Should have had that earlier. Okay, but now that we have this hourly skeleton, let's get this fleshed out. We know the weather icons are always size 8 by default, so let's render out a skeleton here from our UI folder. And just, give this one a class name of size 8. And then we'll replace this p tag and this p tag. If we look at our dev tools here, open up this to get these sizes correct. Looks like they are height 24. The width's going to be a bit variable again. Let's just assume that's 60. So we'll say it's a width 15. And then we'll say the height is 24. So divide that by 4, and that is 6. So we'll say width 15, height 6 for each of these. We'll take this. This will be width 15 and h6. And then for the temperatures down here, looks like it's going to be roughly 32 pixels in width and 24 in height. So that would mean 32 in width, that would be a width of 8. And then what I say for the height there. See, the height is 24, so yeah, that is a height of 6. And now this card is done. As you can see, kind of getting the hang of it, it's not too bad to create these skeleton components. Again, you pretty much just want the exact same JSX as the actual card itself, or the actual element itself that you're mimicking with the fallback, and then just make sure you calculate the sizes correctly. Now that we have this hourly skeleton, let's again go back to app here. We can replace current skeleton with hourly skeleton. And now we should have just one more card left, the additional info card. So let's get this last one knocked out of the way. If I open up additional info, we're going to take the JSX, exact same thing as before, and we'll make a, actually we already have the component. We'll go here, we'll paste it in, making sure to import. And same thing, we want to map over an array of fixed length. If we look at our additional info card, we have, 6 fields. So we'll say array.from, and this is going to be length 6. We're not mapping over anything, so we can't really destructure anything, but we will get the index out of here just to make React happy. So we'll say he is the index, place this here. And now anywhere where we have some data, we're going to replace it with the skeletons, same as the other 3 cards. Well, we can see this icon here is clearly going to be size 8, and we know it's going to be circular. So let's go ahead and just replace this with a skeleton that is size 8. And also rounded full. If we open up our dev tools to see how big the label is for each one of these, obviously, again, like the other text fields, the width's going to be kind of variable, but the height should remain the same. So it looks like in this case, the height is going to be 32 pixels, which means it is H8 in Tailwind. So we will replace this span here with another skeleton. And we will say class name is going to be H8. And then for each of these, let's just decide on a width that's maybe kind of the average of all of them. It looks like, so this one's like 103. The next one here is going to be shorter, so 64. Let's see, what's this one here? 105. Okay, let's just say, I don't know, let's say it's 80 pixels on average. So for these, it's 80 divided by 4 is 20, so we can say with 20, and that'll be for our label. And then lastly, this format component that we have down here is just for the right side of each of our things here, which again, we'll just say for each of these is also a height 32. So let's replace this, another skeleton. This is going to be height 8, which is already 32 pixels, so we're good. And then for the width here, let's see. The width on these is much shorter. Let's just say this is also 32 pixels. So we'll say size 8 for it, just like this. And now this component should be good. And now that we have this, let's go ahead and close out of our DevTools. Let's go back to app. And now we should have a skeleton card for every single card on our dashboard. We'll replace this with the additional info skeleton. And now they're all unique and all ready to go. 4 separate cards, each with their own unique data and unique skeleton loaders. That should look pretty much identical with some pulsing loader blocks. Let's test it. So we can look at these top two. We have the current weather and the hourly forecast. If I go click somewhere on our map, you can see that it does exactly what we want it to. If I go somewhere here, it flashes for a second with the pulsating animation, and then cuts to the real data. And this is exactly what we want. Just so we can see the daily forecast and the additional weather info, let's actually move both of these up in the DOM just so we can see it a bit easier. Go ahead and save it, scroll up here, and the same thing applies for these cards. Whenever I click somewhere, they go to their skeleton variant, and then go back to being the actual data once the data is loaded in. Super, super cool. So now we'll go ahead and move these back down to where they were. And I think it's safe to say we did a pretty good job with these skeleton loaders, and it looks like they're all working the way that we want them to. Here in just a bit, we're going to do responsive design, so we'll be able to see all this stuff at once and not, just have this ugly looking single column. But for right now, these appear to be all working exactly the way that we want them to. One final thing to add to these skeleton loaders that I think would make these look super, super clean is if once the suspense finishes, the actual cards just fade in instead of just appearing there. It doesn't look super bad right now, but it's a little harsh whenever we go from the card to the skeleton loader. It kind of just flashes in. But one thing that I think looks really clean, especially with skeleton loaders, is if the information, once it's loaded, kind of just fades in. There's no built-in fade animation in Tailwind to my knowledge, so something I can do super quickly is just create a super basic fade in animation in our index.css file. So if we go over to it here, what we can do is we can just scroll to the very bottom of the file and let's define an animation. We will say at keyframes, normally how you make animations in Tailwind, and we'll say fade in. Simple animation name. All we have to do is just say something like from opacity 0 to opacity 1, and it's really that simple. We're just defining a super simple animation where we go from being opacity 0, so invisible, to opacity 1, which is visible. So we'll go ahead and save this, and now we can add this to each of our cards. So because our skeleton loaders and our actual cards use this shared card component, we can just add it in here. Now, one thing I want to be careful of is I don't want the entire card to fade in. So I don't want this outer div to be the one that fades. I think that would be a bit too over the top if we had, let's say, data on the page, and then we click somewhere to get the skeleton loader, and the data loads in, and then the entire card just fades back in. I think that would look really clunky. So ideally, instead, we have this div be the one that fades in. So the whole card still stays on the page, but just the content of the card fades in slowly. So essentially, I want to add this animate fade in to this class name. The simple way we can do this while still maintaining this children class name in here and not messing that up is to actually just wrap this whole thing here in a CLSX. And that way we can add more stuff to it. So we'll say CLSX, import it from here. We'll say comma after children class name, so we still include it. And then what we can do is we can say animate. This IntelliSense is kind of annoying. We'll say animate, and then we'll do brackets for an arbitrary, and we'll just do this in line. We will say fade dash in, because that's the name of our animation right here, as we defined it in index.css. And then we want to separate these out by underscores, because you can't have spaces in an arbitrary. In CSS, you can have spaces, but in an arbitrary, you can't add spaces like this. So you usually use underscores to separate them out. So we'll say 0.6 seconds, another underscore, ease out forwards. I was testing earlier and I think 1 second's a bit too long, so that's why I'm doing 0.6, and then this will just make it ease out. But essentially this just compiles to this CSS class right here. So it's nothing crazy, it's just inline inside of an arbitrary. Now if we go ahead and save this, and we go to our page to test, click on here, these cards should fade in. Let's refresh the page here. It looks like they're not quite, so we need to fix something. Let's actually test to make sure it's not happening too fast. Let's set this like 5 seconds, just so it's super obvious. Go here, And yeah, it's definitely not fading in. I think I may have mistyped this in next time. I think this should be an underscore because these should be two separate things. So we go ease out and then forwards. Let's actually save this now. And there we go. The fade's working in. So as you can see, this is like obviously super slow because we have this 5 seconds. Let's change it back to 0.6 seconds. Go ahead and save this now. Refresh this page. And now when we click somewhere, I think this fade in looks a lot cleaner than having the data just kind of flash there. We could draw it out a bit longer. I mean, if we did 1 second, I take it back. I don't think it looks that bad. I think having 1 second actually looks a bit cleaner than having the 0.6 seconds. So let's go ahead and keep this. But yeah, you get the gist here. Essentially with these, if I want to go anywhere on the map, click somewhere, skeleton loaders come in, fade out, fade in, and it looks way less harsh and quite a bit smoother. Before we get to the responsive design part of our app and getting the light mode and dark mode toggle set up, the last major piece of functionality would be adding a side panel here on the right side where we can display some additional information about wherever in the world that we are. The free tier of Open Weather only comes with so much stuff, and one of the other free APIs we could use without paying anything is the air pollution API. So I thought it would be cool if we could use this API to fill up a side panel for our app. Because we just have this one-page dashboard-like view, I think having a side panel would make the UI look really nice and clean. If we go back to the API for the air pollution and go to the API documentation, you can see that we have a couple of different types of air pollution. So different pollutants that we have, and they each have their own respective value ranges. An easy way to fill out a side panel for our app would be to have a card for each one of these pollutants. So a card for SO2, one for NO2, one for PM10, and you get the idea. And then maybe for each card we could have some sort of slider in it to show how low or high the value is. And then something saying whether it's in the good range, fair range, moderate range, and so forth. If we're going to use a slider to show how good or bad the pollutant is, we can actually use a slider component from Часть. So if we go back to their components here, they do have a slider, I believe it is right here, that just looks something like this, that I think could be a nice little visual indicator of where the pollutant is and how it falls on the spectrum of being, good, moderate, whatever. So without wasting any more time, let's get started on this side panel. The first question is, how do we functionally make a side panel in an app like this? Well, typically at large enough screen sizes, the dashboard and the side panel would both be visible at the same time. But with all side panels, at some point, at small enough screen sizes, we need to make it collapse, and when the user optionally opens it up, it opens over the dashboard content. And that's because if we're on a small screen size, we can't just cram the dashboard and the side panel together because we won't have enough room to work with. For now, let's just start working on the side panel under the assumption that it'll be displaying over the dashboard content, just so it's easy for us to see as we develop it. So if we go to our file explorer, go back to our components folder that we've been using this whole time, let's make a new file in here. I'm going to call it sidepanel.tsx, tsrfc to make the component, and we'll get this component made. Now let's think about how a side panel should be styled. Side panels are usually pretty similar to headers in that they need to be positioned absolutely. Most of the time, whether it's a header or a side panel, they are positioned either fixed or sticky or something like that. For this particular side panel, we want it to always be in the same spot in the screen no matter what, so let's make it fixed. So let's throw a class name on this div here. We will say fixed top 0 to make it align to the top of the screen, right 0 to make it align to the right side of the screen, and we'll also give it height screen to make sure it takes up 100% of the viewport. And we're going to change this, but for now, let's just set it to with 50 by default. And also to make it stand out a little bit, shadow MD. In terms of how we want the side panel to stand out from the dashboard, we don't want it to be the exact same color. However, one thing you will notice is if we go into our index CSS, one of the variables that Часть actually made was this sidebar color right here. So we can actually just use that. So for the background for the side panel, we will just say BG sidebar. Now that we have these few things, let's quickly just save this. And I'm going to go into our app and we'll actually render it out in here. Let's actually wrap everything we have so far. I'll wrap it in a div and then just remove div to make it a fragment. So this way, all this code right here is going to be our dashboard. But then in that same component, so in our uppermost app here, we're just going to render out side panel just like this. Go ahead and save it. You should see this side panel does now pop up and it overlays a lot of our content. Like I said before, for some reason the map we have has a bunch of z-index stuff set in there that's around z1000. So let's actually just go into our side panel here and just hijack that and say z1001. That way it goes over both the legend and the map itself. And instead of doing width 50, let's actually up this to, I don't know, let's say width 80. Now that we have this outer div set up, what should be inside of here? Well, just like the rest of the cards that we have on the dashboard, I actually want to wrap this whole side panel in a suspense, because I think it would look good to have skeleton loaders for these little side panel cards that we're going to make as well. So what we'll do in our side panel, if we're following that exact same pattern, we will just have suspense like this, imported from React, and we'll get the side panel content set up inside of here, and we'll set up our fallback once we get there. And the reason I'm putting this suspense in here, and not, for example, at this level, with the side panel right here, is because I don't want the entire side panel to disappear. I just want the inner content of it to be suspended. So that's why I'm moving it in here and not on the outside like the others are. However, to take advantage of the suspense in here, we'll still need to have our suspense query in a component that's inside of these. So what we'll do here is make another function. We'll just call this air pollution. And this will be kind of the component that actually renders the content of the side panel, which we can just render up here just like this. Now in this component, here comes the query part. We've got the suspense already wrapped around this component, and we want to take advantage of that by calling a use suspense query inside of air pollution, where we can actually get the air pollution data. However, we don't have a function for that yet, so let's go ahead and set that up. If we take a look back at our api.ts file, we already have a function for the weather data, and we already have a function for the geocoding. Let's make one last function in here to get the information for the air pollution. So what I'll do is, just like the rest of them, I'll just copy this to make it a little easier. Write this. Instead of calling this get geocode, we're going to say, get air pollution. And it'll actually take an identical arguments to get weather. We'll want latitude and longitude. And I'll show you that in just a second in terms of why we're doing that. Let's do it like this. And the reason we're letting it take in latitude and longitude, just like get weather, is because if we go back here and we look at the air pollution API, we can scroll down to where it gives us the link, how we can actually fetch this information. And as you can see, just like the weather one, all it takes in is latitude, longitude, and an API key. We already have all the logic on our page to get the latitude and longitude coordinates of wherever we click on the map or select from the dropdown. Since we already have that, this will be super easy. We can just pass it through to this get air pollution function. So what we'll do is, just like the other ones, we'll take this link right here, and instead of calling the weather link in here, we will just call this link instead for air pollution. Much like the others, we'll replace this with API key and this $ here for the expression. And then, just like the other ones, we'll want to pass through latitude and longitude into this expression. And now this should be good to go. And of course, for the geocoding and for the weather, we have our own unique schemas. So let's now generate one for the air pollution. If we look here, scroll down, it should give us an example of the response object. So it's just these couple of fields here. We have just the coordinates, and then we have a list that has a bunch of the information about the air pollution components. Just like the exact same way I did with the other two, I'm going to plug this response into ChatGPT and ask it to generate me a Zod schema. Let's go ahead and in our schemas folder, we'll make our last and final schema, and we would just call it air pollution schema. So make it lowercase, air pollution schema.ts, and we'll go ahead and paste in exactly what ChatGPT generated for me, which is this right here. Making sure, of course, to import Z. Actually, just to make sure, we'll just do the import like this, just so we get it from Zod. And now we have a schema for our air pollution. Said it before and I'll say it again. ChatGPT, or AI in general, is really good at generating schemas like this. So if you want to save time and save a lot of monotonous stuff of just copying stuff over, this is something that I definitely think you could use LLMs for. Now that we have this, all we have to do is go back to our API.ts file. And instead of parsing through any other schema, we'll just parse through air pollution schema, and now everything should be fine and dandy. If we save this file, now we have a perfectly fine query function to call that will get us the air pollution information at any given coordinates. Now that we have this, let's go back to our side panel here and construct our suspense query. So we'll say const data equals use suspense query, just like this. And then for here, we'll need, again, a query key and a query function. For the query key, let's just say pollution for right now. And then for the query function, we're just going to make this the function we just wrote, which is get air pollution, making sure to pass in the latitude and longitude. So we'll say like this, get air pollution. And here we need to pass those coordinates in. And ideally we pass them into both the query key and the query function. Well, luckily we already have the coordinates in the parent of the side panel, which is app here. So the exact same way we're passing it down to our children components, we can pass it down to the side panel. So let's give it the exact same props actually. We'll pass coordinates down just like this. We'll save it, and we'll make sure now that side panel actually expects to have coordinates. So we'll get coords out of here, And we will say chords is going to be of type chords. And we'll have to get coordinates from this component down to the air pollution. Now we could just pass down chords like this, and that'll be perfectly fine. However, one thing that I typically like to do is if I'm drilling it down through 2 layers and I'm not actually using the coordinates in this component, I usually actually don't destructure it. What I will do instead normally is just call props like this, and then I will just spread it down. That way it spreads all the exact same props down. So if we decide to add more in the future, we don't have to be explicit about it. The way you do that is just by curly brackets and you do ... props. And now this air pollution component will have access to all of the same props that side panel does. We'll just have to make sure they share the exact same prop type. So let's make sure this is expecting props. And for this one, we actually will destructure the latitude and longitude out of the coordinates. And actually, my bad, we can't do that. That should be coordinates we're destructuring, not latitude and longitude. And now that we have this in this component, what we can do, we can just say chords, just like this, and then get air pollution is expecting an argument that is just an object of latitude, longitude, which is the exact shape of chords. So we can just pass in chords like this and make sure we import this function. And of course, as always, when using tanstack query with Zod, now if we hover over data, it'll give us the exact type that we need from this air pollution API, which should match the exact type over here. So now we know that TypeScript has context on what we can and can't use. The next question is, how do we actually want to use this data? Well, one of the most important numbers that we get here is this AQI number, which is just the air quality index. And at least from this API, this particular number is the most generic and most applicable number, I guess, for air pollution that we can use in our side panel. So I think it would make sense to put this particular number in some big, bold font. That way it's very easy to see. And then after we do that, what we could do is then map over components. If we look at components here, of course, components is just an object for each one. But essentially what we could do is we could just map over each component like CO, NO, NO2. And for each component, make one of those little cards I was talking about earlier that would just show the information for that particular component. And when I say components in this context, I'm referring to, of course, air pollution components, not React components. So let's go ahead and start setting up that styling. So, of course, it's a React component, so we need to return some JSX. Let's first return this div here. And for this outermost div, I'm going to give it a class name of flex call, gap4, just to give it that vertical layout. And then, like I said, the first thing we'll do is do the AQI, the air quality index. So let's, because it's a header 1 here, let's give it a thing of text 5XL, and we'll say font semi-bold, so this should really stick out quite a bit. And then in here, we want to actually get the AQI number. Again, we can just look at this type here, and you can see it's inside list, and then it is inside main, and then there's this AQI. However, this whole thing here, this list, is an array, technically, but like for other things that have returned an array, we're just going to be worried about the first item in the array, not all the other ones. So what we can do to access the AQI here is do essentially list.main.aqi, but the first index of list. So that'll just be data.list at index 0.main.aqi. And now that we have this, underneath this, let's map out each one of our components. And honestly, this is going to look a little bit ugly, but here's how we're going to do this. We are just going to say data, and then let's look back here to make sure we're getting the right thing. We know we need to get list.components, and then get over each one of these. So what we'll do is we can say data.list, again at index 0.components, and here's where we can map over each component. So we'll say .map just like this. However, because components right here is actually an object and it's not an array, one thing we can usually do for that is to do object.entries. And we can actually wrap, if I can spell entries right, we can actually wrap this entire thing right here, everything before the map, in object.entries. That way we can basically loop over the object, and for each one, we can get the key and we can get the value. The way we do that inside the map is you just make this brackets array like this, and we can extract the key and the value out of here. And then for each one that we're mapping over, we're going to return a function, mostly because we'll have to put some logic in here. Let's specify a return here. And for now, we'll just make this just return a fragment. And actually, I lied. We're not going to do a fragment. For each one, we're going to render out one of our card components because I want these cards to match how the cards actually look on our dashboard, at least in terms of the color and like the rounding and whatnot. And then because we're doing a map, let's make sure we make React happy and we give each card a key. So for this one, we already have the key that we're getting out of here. That's just the key from the object. So we'll say key equals key. And one thing I'm realizing now is that if we're going to use our card, we're going to be missing the title from the card, because right now TypeScript expects an actual required title here to put in. However, these cards we're about to make are not going to actually have a title on them. So to silence that, we'll just make sure title is optional. It'll still be passed in, of course, for our dashboard cards, but not for our side panel cards. In terms of what to actually put inside these cards, I think the first thing that would make sense would be some indicator of what air pollution component that we're talking about. So for example, when we do this key and this value here, the key is going to give us, of course, the actual component name, like CO, NO, NO2, and the value is going to be the number. So I think the first thing we should actually do is just display the key and the number separated with justify between. So what we can do is we can just make two spans. We'll have one for the key, and then we'll also have one for the value. So I'll say key in here, and then value in here. And then we'll go ahead and wrap both of these in a div, and we'll give this the class name of flex, justify between, put them on opposite sides of the card. In terms of the key and the value, we want both of them to be readable. Let's go ahead and give the key a class name of, let's say, text LG, font bold. And then for the value here, we'll do a similar thing, but instead of being bold, we'll make it semi-bold, just so it's slightly less apparent. Shouldn't have two bolds there. And then actually for the component name, I'm thinking because these are just lowercase, let's actually throw capitalize on your two to capitalize these. So we'll just throw capitalize like this. And now that we've done quite a bit with this, let's actually save it and see how it looks. It looks like we have a whole lot of nothing because it just crashed out the page. So let's actually refresh this. Maybe click somewhere else and see what happens. And it looks like we're still, I think, about to get an error here. Let's double check this real quick. We're probably going to get a network error, if I had to guess. It looks like we are getting the actual information back. Okay, yeah, so we're getting the information back fine. Let's see what this error is. Might be a Zod error. Oh, it is. Okay, so it's saying the coordinate expected tuple received object. So let's go back to our air pollution schema real quick, see if we can fix this. Go here, air pollution schema, and it's saying for coordinate, so it's expecting it to be of this shape here, this c.tuple of the number and number. I wonder if ChatGPT sold us out on this. Let's double check the network. And it looks like chord is just an object with longitude and latitude. So yeah, this is definitely not quite right. Makes me wonder if ChatGPT was wrong or if the docs are wrong. Looks like it is, oh yeah, it just says coordinates, so we didn't specify. Okay, so let's fix that real quick. What we can do to fix this is just replace this thing here. We'll say it's a z.object, and it's just gonna be lat, that is a z.number, and lon, which is also a z.number. And then we'll go ahead and save it, and that should fix it because this actually matches the format that we want. Let's go ahead and save that here. Refresh the page, and now you can see we actually have the cards showing up on our page. Now that we're seeing it for the first time, let's go back to our side panel real quick and adjust some of the stuff in here. So it has pretty much no padding on it, so let's do PY8 to create some separation between this AQI number and the top of the side panel. Let's also give PX4 just to give some more horizontal spacing. Go ahead and save that, and that makes quite a bit more room. I also want to make it even a bit wider, so instead of doing with 80, let's just go ahead and do with 90. And these two changes alone immediately make it look quite a bit sharper. Right now, there's no context to what this number here is doing. It's kind of just floating there. So let's actually make a label for it. So right above where we're doing this, let's actually copy this. And we're just going to paste in AQI just like this. And actually, let's make it say air pollution. And I want to have a separate label for AQI. And this particular air pollution title should not be quite as big as the AQI is. So let's make it text 2XL, just like this. So we can say air pollution. This is the AQI number of 2. But let's add a label for that. So let's put actually this exact same class name here. We'll take that and we'll put it right underneath the AQI and just say AQI here. Now if we go ahead and save this, should have air pollution, the AQI number, followed by AQI. Now we should address the fact that these cards over here in the side panel are gonna be slightly different than the cards that we have on the dashboard. We're obviously wanting to share things like the rounding, the shadow, and the way it looks in general. However, because they're gonna look slightly different, I think what we should do in this case is allow the cards to take in an optional class name so we can pass in some conditional styling. So just like we're passing in this optional children class name, let's also add in class name as one of the props, which will just be an optional string in that same vein. So we'll say this class name here And now it takes in both an optional children class name and class name. And of course, just like the way we're doing CLSX to get this children class name on here, let's do the exact same thing for the class name. So this whole class name here, let's wrap this whole thing in brackets. And then in here, we can now call CLSX. Make sure this is all wrapped in CLSX. And we'll throw on class name. Oops, not inside the quotes. Throw on class name inside of here. That way, if we want to pass in a custom class name to our card, now it gets passed through to this outermost div. So let's go ahead and save it. And now, if we head back to our side panel, now where we're rendering out our cards, we can add some custom styling. Just for the sake of adding a cool little hover effect to these cards, I'm going to give it a class name of hover. I'm going to say scale 105 so they grow slightly. And to make that hover smooth, we'll give it transition. We'll say transform. And then we will also say duration 300 to give an explicit duration. And now if we go ahead and save this, the cards over here on the dashboard don't do anything. But now if we hover over these cards, you can see with each mouse over, they just grow slightly. And it's a nice little smooth animation to make it look pretty clean. However, now we can't just ignore the fact that these cards are pretty much the exact same color as the background of the sidebar. I mean, they're actually really hard to see if you're not looking closely. The only thing that's really differentiating it is the shadow that we have around each card. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, I don't really know the logic behind this. If we go into index CSS and look at the variables for whenever we are in dark mode that CN made, we look at card here, it is this 021006 number. And if we actually go to BG sidebar, it's the exact same number. So I'm not sure why sidebar and card are the exact same because it makes it just a little bit awkward. So what we could do is we're passing in the custom class name for side panel. We can pass in our own custom color to make it stand out more. If we go into our card component, in here, we're doing that gradient where we're doing from the card color to card color at 60% opacity. So let's do a similar thing in here. We're going to say from, and the question is what color should we use? Well, there's another variable in here called sidebar accent that I think would be nice to use. It's a little bit different than the actual sidebar itself, so it would stand out way better. So let's say we want it to go from sidebar accent, and we'll do the same exact logic. We'll say to sidebar accent at 60% opacity. And if we go ahead and save this, now our cards appear a lot more visible than they were a second ago. It's nice when they're not the exact same color as their background. We have a proper color, and now it's probably a bit easier to see that hover effect I was doing earlier. As you can see, just a nice little smooth animation here on some cards that look pretty clean. Okay, so right now these cards are super plain. All we're doing is writing the pollutant name right here and then the pollutant value. Firstly, this just isn't very visually appealing to only have this. But secondly, you really have no context to what this value actually means. Is 126.72 good? Is it bad? Is it all right? Who knows what this actually means? Obviously, we want it to be clear to the user that these numbers actually mean something. So let's now talk about the slider component that we mentioned using from CN. I think this component here would work great. I want to disable being able to actually move this because there's really no point in doing that. But what I was thinking is for the slider, we could have on the left side of it some unit right here for, the low end. On the right side, it'd be a unit for the high end, and the slider would just show how either bad or good the pollutant is. I would imagine in most cases, if the pollutant is good, the slider is probably on the low end, and if the pollutant is really bad, like a really high number, then it's on the high end. Let's go ahead and get the slider added to our project. If we scroll down here, we can take the same command, the same way we've been installing our other components. Go ahead and copy it, open up our terminal, and we'll go ahead and add it to our app. Just like the other ones, it should add it to the components folder inside this UI folder here. So now we have this nice slider component. Now that we have this, underneath this div where we're doing our pollutant name and its value, let's actually just render out a slider. So I'll render out a slider like this, make sure to import it. Let's see what it looks like. It's a bit hard to see, so let's go ahead and go to this card here. Let's throw a children class name on it. Let's give it a vertical layout, so flex call. And we will make gap 3 on each of these just to create some separation between the div and the slider. I mentioned not wanting to allow the user to go and just readjust the slider like this because in the context of our app, it doesn't really make sense for the user to be able to change this. So what we can do is on our slider here, we can just throw disabled, which is a prop that should, if we save it, now disable it from actually doing anything. Also, it's kind of easy to see the actual slider when it's taking up color here. But the actual track behind the slider is, again, kind of just blending in with the background of the card. So let's go actually to that slider component real quick. And you can see that by default, we're going to have this BG muted on here for the track. Let's actually replace this with BG sidebar. And now if we save it, I think the track will look a bit nicer, being the same color as the sidebar. So it's still dark, it's not popping out, but it's also not the same color as the cards, which makes it easier to see. And I'm noticing too on these cards, we have this awkward little gap at the top that we shouldn't be having. And that most likely stems from the fact that even though the title prop is optional, we still in the class name here have a gap of 4 for the outer thing. So we're still creating a gap between the title and the children, even if there is no title. So what I'll actually do to get rid of this gap 4 here on only these particular side panel cards is we can go back to side panel and we can actually throw a gap 0 on here. And if we save it, it won't quite get rid of it because in this case, the gap 4 is going to win out over the gap 0. However, if I throw an important on it like this, it should actually, move it to the end, tail v4 thing. Now if I do that, it should get rid of that awkward space at the top. Okay, so now that we've fixed a few things, let's get back to our slider. Right now, it's cool having the slider, but the slider has no context to the actual value itself. Like this slider doesn't have anything to do with 126.72. It's only like that because I changed it before I disabled it. So if I really just refreshed, all these are starting at 0. So how do I actually pass this value into the slider? Well, the thing is, this slider, in order to work properly and look correct, needs a min prop and a max prop. The reason being is, let's say on a slider, I pass in 126.72, and let's say that's all I pass it into the slider, just that number. How does the slider have any context of knowing where on the slider that is, right? Should 162 be at the beginning here? Should it be kind of in the middle? Should it be at the end? Who knows? The only way it knows how to actually position itself is if we have a min and a max. So if the min is 0 and the max is 200, we know that 126 is somewhere kind of in the middle. But without a min and a max, it has no context to that. So for all of our pollutants here, if we look at these, there should be this chart here kind of telling us what each one is. And for all of these, 0 is actually the minimum. You can see it here in this good chart. So we can assume that for the slider, we can pass in min, and min is always going to be 0. Now, however, in terms of max, how do we know what the max one for each pollutant is? And I think if you've been watching long enough, you can probably guess exactly what I'm about to say. We need to use this chart here, but actually transcribing this chart into a data structure by hand is going to be a little bit tedious if we're being honest. So like many other things, I'm going to ask ChatGPT to generate me an object that represents this entire chart here. And here is what it actually generated. I'll just go ahead and paste this whole thing in. So it actually looks like quite a lot. And because it's a lot, I'm not just going to blindly trust it. Let's look through it for a second and make sure this all looks legit. I don't just want to be a certified vibe coder here. So it looks like it generated a few types here at the top. So we have the air quality level, which we can see from open weather is good, fair, moderate, poor, and very poor. So this type looks to be good. Range, we'll just have a min and a max for each. Yep. And then we just have a pollutant type for each different pollutant on here. Seems legit. And then we have air quality ranges, which is just a record of records, which is this massive thing right here. All this object is essentially doing is mapping each pollutant to whatever ranges each keyword is. So like good, we know is this range, fair, we know is this range, and you get the picture. So this object actually looks quite a bit more complicated than it really is. It's not actually super crazy. If I want to know, for example, what is the moderate range for PM10, I would come to PM10, see moderate, and I'd say that it is between 50 and 100. If I want to know the very poor range for O3, I know that it is 180, and the max can be anything, just uncapped. So I think this AI generated data structure is actually going to do just fine. I know if I was doing this by hand, this would have taken me at least probably 10 minutes to make. So going back to our slider up here, we know that we need to set both a max and also a value. If we go ahead and hover value here, we can see that it expects an array of numbers. However, in our case, we only have one number, and that's just going to be the value from right here. We will just say value equals, and we'll make it an array of just one item, and that'll be value. Now the real tough question is, what do we do for our max? So for example, if we're looking at O3, how do we know what the max value is? Because knowing 78 is nice, but I don't know if 78's near the top or near the bottom or what that even means. So to figure out what the max is to get our ranges set up, all we have to do is go down here and look at each one of these objects. Luckily, all of these start from the lowest number meaning, I guess, the best air quality. And the higher the number is, the worse it gets. So because these are sorted by that, it makes our job a little bit easier. That would mean that the max value for each of these would essentially be the max value in all of these very poor categories. However, if we look, all of these have a max of null. And that is because technically, if we look at the open weather documentation here, it actually mentions that these values are any number greater than these, meaning technically it could be infinitely high. That's why it's uncapped and it's just set to null like this. Because the max for these very poor categories are uncapped, what we'll actually use for the max is the min value of the worst quality. So essentially, the highest value could possibly go for any one of these given pollutants is the minimum value of very poor. So the maximum value for PM10 would be 200. The maximum value for PM2_5 would be 75, and you get the picture. So what we can do to actually get that, we can go back up to our JSX here, where we're getting the pollutant information. But before we return, let's go up here and we'll say const pollutant equals, we're going to access this object, air quality ranges, which is just this big thing down here. And we're going to say air quality ranges at key. What this will do is if we have a key that is, SO2, and we try and get air quality ranges at SO2, it will return this object. So that is what this will do. And I'm pretty sure that the keys we have right here are going to be lowercase, not uppercase. So let's actually do key dot to uppercase, just like this. And now TypeScript is going to get mad saying that this has any type because technically key can be any string, but this object here is specific strings. So if you're ever in a case where you know for a fact that these keys are going to be of the correct type, what you can do is you can just typecast it and you can say as key of type of air quality ranges like this, and that will silence the type error. It's safe to assume in this case that the pollutants that are actually being returned from open weather are always going to match the exact same pollutants that it gives to us in the type here, because this air quality ranges was based off that response in the first place, so they should always match 1-to-1, which is why it's fine to typecast this like this. And then to get the max value for each pollutant, like I said, we're going to use the min value for the very poor category. So what we can do is we can say const max equals pollutant, and pollutant is of course going to be of the record that we saw. So we'll say pollutant at the very poor category dot min. So for example, if this pollutant gets set to, let's say, this NO2 object, and then we want to get the max here, we're just saying pollutant at very poor dot min. So we would get very poor dot min, which is 200. So we assume the max for NO2 is going to be 200. And that's just what this logic is doing right here. However, we have to acknowledge that there can be cases where the quality is very poor, and the value that we actually end up getting will be higher than the max. Because if, for example, we say the max is 200, what if our value is, 370 or something for NO2? Then technically max is not correct, because then the max is going to be under what it actually should be. So what we can do to actually fix this is where we're setting the max here, we'll assume this is still the default value. But what we can do is we can say math.max here. And we're going to take the maximum value between this value and the actual value itself. So if the value is 370, but the max is 200, then the real max technically is 370. That's what this line here will do. Now that we have this, we can plug it into our slider. So we'll just say max equals max. Now if we go back to our app here, go ahead and save it. And boom, now we have sliders that actually correspond to the real value in the correct ranges. This is for Tokyo. Let's go select, London. And you can see now we have new sliders. If I go to Madrid, same thing, sliders are a bit different. And basically everywhere in the world that I go, they will all look a bit different, which is exactly what we want. I think right below these sliders, we should put in actual legends so we know what the real min and max are, just for the user to see. So below our slider here, let's make another div to make some sort of scale. And we'll go ahead and give this div a class name of flex justify between. And we'll make the text XS. And inside of here, we'll just put two p tags. We'll put the min and the max here. So the min's always going to be 0, and the max we'll just say is the max. So go ahead and save it. And now we have at least some sort of scale for each one. And now one thing I think we might run into in a second, because we're going to be adding more stuff to these side panel cards, is this side panel might need to scroll. We're already getting close to touching the bottom of the side panel. Let's go up to our outermost side panel div here. And let's just throw overflow y scroll on it, just in case. That way if we do get to overflow, we can actually start scrolling it. The very last thing now that I want to add to each of these side panel cards is some sort of visual indicator of what range each value falls under. For example, right now on this card, 03 is 123.42. Is that good? Is that fair? Moderate? Very poor? We don't have that actual information yet. What we do, we're just not actually displaying it. So 123.42, if we look at the docs here, or 03 would fall in the moderate range. So in this example, we should display to the user that we're in the moderate range. Not just have the slider, because having the slider itself is cool, but I think having the actual string of saying what condition we're in would be even better as well on top of it. So underneath this slider plus the labels that we have for the min and the max, let's just add some tags for each different range. And the one that is active will be highlighted. For example, we'll have all 5 ranges under each slider, from good, moderate, very poor, whatever. But if 03, for example, falls under moderate, only the moderate tag would be highlighted. Right under this div here, let's make one last one. We'll make a div here. We'll give it a class name of flex, justify between, to separate out each of these tags. And then in here, we want to map out each of the different range strings. What I mean by that is for each pollutant that we have the different ranges here. We have good, fair, moderate, poor, and very poor. So they are the keys of this pollutant object. To get that, we can access exactly that. We can say object.keys, and we're going to get the keys of the pollutant, which will give us the actual range names. And then for each one, we're going to map each quality to a span. And for this span here, we'll throw a couple of things on the class name. First, we'll say px2, py1. I want these to be kind of small, so they're not going to be taking a lot of space. We want to have a bit more horizontal spacing than we do vertical. We'll also throw rounded MD, text SS, and font medium. I'm doing most of these just to make sure these tags are pretty small so they can all 5 fit on the card. And then for each one of these spans here, what we want to display is just the quality. So if we save it now you'll see under each one, we have the 5 different qualities. Having this rounded medium on here doesn't really do anything when there's no sort of background color or borders, because we can't really, obviously, see any rounding or anything. So what I'll do around this whole span actually is, like our other things, I'll wrap it in a CLSX. And like I said before, I essentially want the tag that is active to be highlighted a color. The other ones are just going to be like a, a dullish gray color. So we'll say CLSX here. And then in here, we're going to say if the quality is equal to whatever the current level is, then we're just going to give it, I don't know, let's say BG yellow 500, just to see it being active. Otherwise, if it's not that, let's make it BG muted. So it's kind of like a disabled color. And then we'll also do text muted, foreground, just like this. So essentially, if our quality is the active one, just make each of these tags yellow. If it's not the active one, just make it this kind of gray, dullish color, and make the text muted foreground, which would be kind of a white color. But what is current level? I'm using this check right here, but this current level doesn't actually exist yet. We haven't written any logic to actually get the current range that we're in, so let's do that real quick. The way that we can do this isn't too complicated. Essentially in here, what we can do is we can just say, and actually, sorry, it wouldn't be in here, it'd be up higher. Let's go up here, and let's say const current level. And the way that we're going to do this is we're going to write an immediately invoked function, so a nameless function here. We're just going to do parentheses, just like this. And then we're going to call it immediately. In here, all we really want to do is just loop through the different ranges and see if our value falls in them. So for example, let's say we're looking at NO2, for example, and our value is, I don't know, 110. What we're going to do to figure out what range we're actually in is we're just going to loop through each one. We're going to say, okay, good, 0 to 40. Does the, whatever number I just said, like 110, does 110 fall between 0 and 40? Nope, so let's go to the next. Is it 40 and 70? Nope, let's go to the next. Is it between 70 and 150? Yes, so we know we're in moderate. That's what we're going to do to get our current level here. So let's write a for loop in here. I'm just going to say for const level and range of object.entries pollutant. And for this, we're going to do something. All we're going to do is check to make sure we're within the bounds of that particular level. We're going to say if the value that we have for this pollutant is greater than or equal to the minimum, and it's also less than or equal to the maximum, then we can just return, oops, not null, then we can return the level. So what this is doing is for NO2 example, the level would be NO2, and the range is going to be the 0 to 40 example for the first category. And all we're doing is checking, is our computed value actually within that range? If it is, we know we're in that range, so return that. because you want current level to be that level. It looks kind of complicated, but if you think about it for a second, it's nothing too crazy. It is the exact logic that I just explained to you step by step. However, we're going to get this type error on here saying that max is possibly null, which is true because if we look at our types here, max can be number or null because some of these are uncapped. So what we'll do in here, in this check where we're seeing if it is less than or equal to the max, we will just explicitly add a check in here and say is range.max equal to null for this, and that should silence that error. However, what this means is that if we hover over current level now, it'll say it can be string or undefined, and we don't want that. So let's say if for whatever reason we can't compute it, we're just going to default to very poor. So we're just going to do this. That way current level is always going to be a string. So we'll go ahead and save this. And now this should be our current level logic. What's cool is if you just notice, because we already hard coded the current level in here before we even had it, now if the quality is equal to current level, then it will highlight it. So CO is in good, so now this good tag is highlighted. O3 is in moderate, so moderate's highlighted, which is really cool because that's exactly what we want. However, this yellow is more of a placeholder color. I don't actually want each highlighted thing to be yellow because yellow for everything looks a little bit ugly and doesn't really, make a lot of sense. I think what would make more sense is if moderate was always yellow, but good could be green, and then very poor could be red. So real quick, up here, let's make one last variable in addition to current level. Let's make some space here, actually, so we can have this format a little bit nicer. And then let's go up here. We will say const quality color, and we're going to do the exact same thing we actually did up here, where we use an immediately invoked function to write out some logic. So I'll say const quality color equals this, parentheses, make it a function, and then immediately invoke it. And then all we're going to do inside of here is we're just going to make a switch statement. We're going to say switch, and we're going to switch off whatever the current level is. So whether we're very poor, moderate, whatever. And then inside of here, we'll just make some cases for each one to actually get the color. So we'll say case, if it is equal to good, then what we'll do, oops, should not be the syntax, case good, colon here. And then for good, let's just say, I don't know, BG green 500, which we will return that. So in that case, if we're on good, quality color can be BG green 500. And we'll do this actually for each one. So we'll actually going to copy this, paste it a couple of times here. This next one is going to be fair. This one will be moderate. This one will be poor. This one will be very poor. And then let's just make a default return case. So if we don't have any, for whatever reason, any current level, which, we should, but let's just say we don't, then we are going to return BG just gray 500, just something neutral. And actually, instead of that, we'll do zinc 500. And then in here, we'll go ahead and save this just to get some formatting. And let's change these colors around a little bit. We'll assume that if we are fair, we'll use yellow. If we are moderate, we'll use orange because that's a bit more severe. We'll say poor is actually red. And then very poor is going to be purple, just like this. And now we have a color for each different level of quality. So what we can do is go down here, and instead of just hard coding in this BG yellow 500, what we can do is just instead just make it quality color like this. Now if we go ahead and save it, boom, they're all going to switch to their appropriate colors. So now the goods are green, moderates are oranges, and very poors are purple. And we of course have fair and poor. But now this at least gives some color association with each level. Let's click around this map a little bit just to experiment. So right now we are near, I think, Dubai here, which usually has some kind of rougher air pollution, at least for some of these numbers. If we go to, somewhere in Romania, we can see here's the air pollution information there. Let's go Ireland. This looks like, let's do, New York, put up here. Yeah, we can see for each different place we go to, we have some of our own unique information. That's whether it's a custom one, whether we go to unknown city, it will always have its own unique weather information. And the fact that we're able to get it like this is honestly pretty cool. This air pollution information isn't super essential, but it's some extra information just to take up on our dashboard. And honestly, I think it looks pretty clean having these little cards. Awesome. Now there's just a few finishing touches I want to put on this side panel before we're fully done with it. First, I think it would be great to add a tooltip next to each of these different pollutants describing what each of them actually means. For example, I have no idea what SO2 means or what the heck PM2_5 is. So having a tooltip next to these with a little descriptive field might be nice. Just like we've been doing for our other components, we can use shadcn to help us get a tooltip. So if we go and look at the shadcn components, and we head to the tooltip component, you can see it just looks something like this. You have a little button or something, and you hover over it, and this tooltip appears. And I think this would work perfectly in our example. So let's go ahead and add this to our app. I'll go down here with the install command, and I think this might actually be the last shadcn component we install. Cannot copy that. Let's get that in here. Go ahead and add it into our terminal. For some reason, copying weird still, so let's get rid of this. Go ahead and run it, and now we should have the shadcn tooltip. And what we'll do is we'll take the exact code in this example here. We'll just take everything in this JSX, and we'll go ahead and copy it. And then what we'll do is, going back to our app here, let's add a tooltip first next to the AQI right here. Because if I didn't have any context to open weather, or I didn't know that it was already air quality index, I'd have no idea what this number actually means. So where we find our AQI here, which should be up here, let's scroll up a little bit, we have the AQI. Let's put the AQI and the tooltip in the same row. So let's actually wrap this here with a div, just like this. We're going to say class name is flex, item center, gap 2, and here, right next to our AQI, we're going to add the tooltip. So we'll just go ahead and paste in the exact code that we copied from shadcn, and let's go ahead and import each of these things. So we'll import the tooltip here. This should be from UI. Same with the tooltip trigger, and also the tooltip content. Instead of this tooltip just saying add to library, obviously we want to have it say our own thing. So let's actually go down here and look at where it describes the AQI, or the air quality index. It has this pretty simple description here saying what it is. So let's actually just take this verbatim here. Go ahead and copy it, and let's paste this into our code so it says that instead of the add to library. And then lastly, we need a valid trigger for our tooltip. In this example with the button, what it's using is a pre-built button component, and the trigger for the tooltip is essentially whatever you hover that actually activates the tooltip. So in this example, it is actually just a shadcn button, but in our case, we're not going to need that. What I think would be cool in our app, which is what a lot of apps do for a tooltip, is to have a little information icon you can hover over that will have the tooltip. I went on SVG repo real quick and just found this cool little information icon, so let's use this for our trigger. What we'll do is go into another one of our components where we import these SVGs as components. Like for example, let's do hourly forecast here. Actually, no, this is not a good example. Let's go to additional info. Let's take this import here. Same thing, we're just using SVGR. So let's get this. Now we can go back into our side panel, and let's import this at the top. We will say import, we'll call it information, and the SVG was just called information.svg. We're going to go ahead and use that. And now we can use this instead of this button for the trigger. So right here, we will just render out this information SVG and make it something pretty small. We'll just say class name is size 4. And now if we go ahead and save this, let's see what it looks like. Save it here. And also just so you can see it a little easier, I'll add invert to make sure it is white. Go ahead and save it again. And here you can see our tooltip. And if I hover over it, looks like nothing actually happens. So let's remove this as child here. I don't think we actually need this. Go ahead and save that. And still looks like it's not quite working correctly. If I had to guess, it's because our side panel has a z-index and this has no z-index, so it's probably just showing up behind it. So let's actually go on to our tooltip content here, and let's give it a high z-index. Tooltips should generally show over everything on the page, and we have a lot of content around the 1000 z-index area. So I don't like doing this all the time, but let's just throw like a Z2000 on this, and now it should be guaranteed to show over everything. So now if I hover it, you can see this is what the tooltip looks like, just some white text. And I don't like that it's like super long here. I'd rather have it just wrap. So what we can actually do here is on our P tag, let's just throw something like a max width XS. We hover this, that's just setting the max width to 300 pixels. That way it'll wrap. So if I go ahead and save it now and hover over it, that looks a little bit better. Also, I don't know how this random slash got here. Let's remove that. And now it should be looking good. This tooltip is exactly what we want. Just a little descriptive field saying exactly what AQI actually is, and it gives context to what this number actually means. Let's now get this exact same tooltip with just different text inside of it on each one of these cards to explain what each one of these pollutants actually means. So what we'll actually do is take this tooltip exactly. Let's go ahead and copy it. Let's go down to where we're rendering out our cards down here. We're going to find the div where we have the key, because that's the actual pollutant name. So this right here. And just like we did with the AQI, let's wrap this in a div, and we'll give it the exact same thing. We'll say it's going to be a class name of, I think it was just flex, item center, and gap 2. Make some space for this here, and then paste in our tooltip. And if we go ahead and save it, now we should have a tooltip on each one of the cards. If I hover it, however, we're still going to see the exact same tooltip content as the AQI, which is not what we want. We want to have each one be unique to what it actually means. I'm not familiar with what each one of these things is, so I went to ChatGPT and I asked it to basically just generate the names of each of these from the abbreviation. So for example, for CO, we have carbon monoxide, for O3, we have ozone, and you get the picture. So what we can do now is we can actually use this mapping to display something in our tooltip. If I scroll up to where our tooltip is, it's right here. Let's go ahead and get rid of this AQI text right here because we don't obviously need that. And let's just say concentration of, and then here's where we'll enter in whatever the name is that this mapping gives us right here. So what we can say, it's called pollutant name mapping. So in here, we can say pollutant name mapping key, just like this. And now if we go ahead and save it, each of these tooltips should say exactly what they are. CO says concentration of nothing. That's not quite right. Probably again because the key is lowercase and these down here are actually uppercase. So let's go ahead and change that. Let's just say to uppercase for this key here, if I can spell it correctly. And then now if we save it and hover, these should say the exact thing. So this says concentration of carbon monoxide, concentration of nitrogen monoxide, concentration of nitrogen dioxide, and so forth. We know the key that we're getting here is technically just a string, but it's always going to map this pollutant type right here. So what we can do is, because we're already typecasting it to uppercase, we know it's always going to be that. So let's just say as pollutant, and that should silence our type error. And now this side panel should be good to go. We have quite a bit of information here. We have the air pollution, we have the AQI number, we have these cards that have a nice little hover effect with sliders on them that change depending on where in the world that we go, and we have tooltips to explain what each one of these things mean. The actual content of the side panel is done, but the very, very last thing I want to do is add the ability for it to open and close. That way, it can just flow better with the rest of our page. Because right now, it's just sitting over the dashboard, but that might change depending on the screen size that we're on. So let's take care of that really quickly. It's not going to be too difficult. Let's close out of all these tabs here so we can kind of start fresh. And in our app component, let's actually make one last piece of state that just tells us whether or not our side panel is open. So we'll say const is side panel open, set is side panel open, equals use state, and we're going to default it to true. And then what we'll do is we'll pass both these pieces of state to our side panel. So we'll go down here and we'll say is side panel open equals that exact state. And then we'll do the same for the setter function. So set is side panel open, and also pass that in as well. And once we do that, we'll have to update our props to make sure it expects those exact props. So we'll say is side panel open is going to be a Boolean, and then set is side panel open will just be a dispatch of set state action. That's also going to be a Boolean, and we will import dispatch. And the reason that I'm defining the state up here in app and then passing it down to side panel is because we're about to tackle the responsive design aspect of our app, and the rest of our dashboard, meaning all this stuff, is going to have to know whether or not our side panel is open to position itself properly. So that's why I have the state up here, and then I'm just passing it down to the side panel. So what we'll do now is we'll go ahead and save this, go back to our side panel. We'll go ahead and destructure these things from our props, but still keeping this props thing here so we can still spread it down. And we will just say const is side panel open, set is side panel open equals props so we can get them out of here. What we'll do for our class name here is we will wrap this all in a CLSX because I want to add a condition to it. So we'll say CLSX here. Obviously, it goes to the very end. And what we're going to add here is we're going to say if the side panel is open, then what I want to do is I want to translate x0, meaning it should stay exactly where it is. Otherwise, if it's not, I want to translate x full. That way it shifts it off the entire screen. And then what we'll do is at the very top of our panel here, let's actually make a button that will just call the set is side panel open and set it to true or false, depending on whether we are opening or closing it. So what we'll do is we'll just say button. And then in the on click here, we will just say set is side panel open, and we will just set it to false. And it makes sense to only set it to false because if the side panel isn't open at all, then, well, this button won't even be clickable in the first place. So the only way this button can actually be here is if it's already open, meaning if we click the button again, it should set it to false now to close it. Now I could just make this a super simple button that just, says something like hide in here, but I don't want to do that. That's not very clean from a UI perspective. Ideally, it's something like a chevron or visual indicator that we're going to be closing the side panel. I found this simple chevron left.svg on SVG repo that I think we can use at the top of our side panel. That would be a good little indicator that we're going to be closing it. Let's go ahead and import this chevron left as a component. We'll go up to our side panel here. In the same way that we're doing our information, we will just say, I don't know, we'll just call this component chevron. And it was, I believe, chevron left.svg. So now instead of saying hide, let's just render out chevron, like an actual component. And we will say class name. I don't know, let's try size 8. And if we go ahead and save it here, now we should have the chevron up here. It still is black, so I'll go ahead and invert it to make it white so we can see it. And now this chevron should be our button. It looks like this SVG has a little bit of extra space on it because it's not quite left aligned with our A here. So if we actually go into it, I think we can verify that. Let's make a bit more room here. I believe, yeah, so it looks like there's some awkward space there on the left side. So let's actually go into here. I don't like doing this because it's a little bit hacky, but I'm going to add -2 for the left margin here. That way it just scoots it over a little bit. And now if we go ahead and click it, you can see our panel completely closes. We don't actually have a way to get it back yet, so we'll have to refresh, but I can show you again. We have our panel here. I click the chevron, and now it closes it. Let's add a super simple animation so it doesn't just immediately disappear, but actually slides out. All we have to do is we have to go up here to our uppermost class name, which, yeah, is this one right here. And we'll just add transition, transform, and we will say duration 300. And now if we go ahead and save it, and now close, now it slides out as opposed to just flashing out. So this looks really smooth. And this is what most side panels, at least on most modern apps, are going to do. They're going to slide in and out like this because it just looks cleaner than it just teleporting. The very last thing we'll need to do with this is make a button to actually reopen the panel. That way we can go between open and close. Just like I found the chevron SVG to close it, I found this hamburger SVG that's a pretty common sign in most apps that we're going to open up some sort of menu like a side panel. But I think this icon would work well for our open button. So what we'll actually do here is copy this exact same button, and let's head over to our app component, and let's put it in the same div that has these two drop downs right here. So they're all in a row together. If I go to the div down here, you can see we have this div that is flex call gap 8, which I think is not the right one. It should actually be this one here. This flex gap 8 is going to hold both of our drop downs. So let's here, after the map type drop down, go ahead and just paste in this button. I'll take this negative left margin off and instead just do ML auto. That way it aligns itself against the far right side. And of course, we'll have to replace this chevron with the hamburger. So let's go ahead and take this image import. We'll just copy it verbatim up here. And just change this to say hamburger instead. And imports, I think it's capital H hamburger. No, lowercase. Okay. So it's just hamburger.svg just like this. And now we'll replace our chevron with hamburger, still being size 8 though with the invert. Go ahead and save it now. And now we should have this hamburger at the very top that if we click it, won't do anything because it's setting it to false still. So let's set it to true whenever we click the hamburger here. Let's go ahead and save it. Side panel starts open. We have our chevron to close it, and we have our hamburger to open it back up. So now we can safely alternate between the two states, open and close. This is super smooth now. We might come back in a minute and customize how these buttons look, but the functionality is completely there, and I think we're in a great spot. So we now have a fully functioning side panel that displays a bunch of information that is useful for us to see with a bunch of cool logic that we can just open and close however we want. However, one thing I don't want to forget about before we move on from the side panel is the skeleton loaders. We already have the skeleton loaders for the rest of our cards whenever we're fetching new data. However, we don't have any for the side panel. If I click somewhere, the entire panel just blanks out before it reappears. Because the cards fade in, it actually doesn't look horrible that way, but I think to keep things consistent, we should make skeleton loaders for each of these cards as well. Making skeleton loaders now is super easy because we've done it a couple of times. So let's go ahead and go to our file explorer. Let's go to our skeletons folder, and we'll make another skeleton card in here. We will just say side card skeleton.tsx, just like this. We'll do tsrfc to create the component. And what I'll do is the exact same thing we did for our other cards. I will go to the JSX for the card itself, take all of this exactly, go ahead and copy it, and we'll paste it in here, being sure to import the card, and we'll remove a couple of things from here. First of all, we don't need the key. Next, this tooltip is not needed on any of this, so we'll go ahead and just remove that. And if you recall with our other skeleton cards, I'll go to the current skeleton, for example. Everywhere that we were consuming some sort of API data or anything on the actual component, we just replaced it with this skeleton component from Часть. So let's do the exact same thing here. I'll go ahead and copy one of these over back to our sidecar skeleton, and we'll start replacing them. If we first look at this right here, this text with the tooltip, we can see that with the tooltip plus the text itself, it's about 50 in width. So it's, 46 here, we'll just say 50 to round up. And then 28 in height. So we'll actually replace this whole thing here, this div that has the key. We will say it's a skeleton that has, what I say it was, 28 in height. So divided by 4, that is height 7. So that's already good. And then the width is 50. So divided by 4, that's about 12. So we'll just say 12 here. And of course, we'll make sure to import this skeleton here. Now for this next one, for the actual value, this can also be a bit variable, but we'll say this is going to be the exact same height and actually pretty much the same width too. So we'll give it the exact same stats for this one. It will say width 12 and height 7. Next, if we go to look at our slider here, we can see that this slider is just hard-coded to be 6 pixels tall, which makes our job super easy. We'll make a skeleton here to replace the slider. We will make sure it is width full to take up the entire space of the card, and 6 pixels divided by 4 is going to be a height of 1.5. That should be our sliders taken care of. Now if we just look at these two numbers down here that represent our scale, we can see that 0 is always going to be, 16 pixels and about, let's just say 8 wide. So we'll replace this with 8 divided by 4 is width 2, and then 16 tall divided by 4 should be height 4. So we'll replace both of these with that, and now we're almost done. We don't need to map over the actual pollutants here. We already know that there's only 5 possible qualities. That's good, fair, moderate, poor, and very poor. So instead of mapping over this, all we have to do instead is do an array of fixed length, because after all, it's a skeleton, so we don't need the actual data. And we will just say length is 5. We don't need this quality here, but we will go ahead and get the index out of here just to throw it on this. And what we'll do is we'll just put a skeleton here. Let's throw a key of index. And then for each of these little tags we have down here, it looks like they're going to be, 24 in height. So divided by 4 will be a height of 6. And then the widths are going to vary a little bit. Let's just say for the sake of these, let's see, we have 40, 70, let's just say 60. So 60 divided by 4 will be a width of 15. Now if we go ahead and save it, this skeleton should be fully done. It should just mimic our sidecars exactly. So let's go ahead and close our side panel here. And now if we actually head back to the side panel, we can finally make use of the suspense that we wrote at the very beginning when we started this. Up here, we have a suspense that is wrapping around air pollution. But hold on a second. We just made a skeleton component for each of the cards, but this suspense wraps the entire air pollution component. Meaning essentially this entire air pollution component also needs to be a skeleton. At least the component that we use in the fallback of the suspense. So what we can do will actually be super simple. We'll make one final component here in our skeletons folder that we're going to call, let's say side panel skeleton.tsx, just like this, tsrfc to make the component. And what we're going to do is we're going to go into side panel, take all the JSX here that we have for the air pollution, so literally all of this. This should be the opening and closing div. Yep. We're going to take all of it, and we're going to go ahead and paste it in here. But we can obviously remove almost all of this. First of all, this tooltip, we don't need it. So let's go ahead and delete this. And because we're doing with the skeleton, we don't need any of this logic in here. So let's completely purge all of this logic out. We only have the return. And we just finished working on our skeleton cards for the side panel. So instead of mapping over the regular cards here, let's map over those. So we'll just say side card skeleton, just like this. And of course, we won't have actual data to map over. Let's just map over an array of fixed length. We know there's always going to be, it looks like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pollutants. So we'll say an array of length 8. So array.from going to be length 8 like this. And we obviously won't have any key and value to map over, so we don't need to worry about that. But let's still go ahead and get the index out just to continue good practice here. And we don't actually need this curly brace or this return anymore, so we can go ahead and get rid of this and just map this directly. So let's go down here, get rid of, I think, all of these, except not quite all of them, just these two. Actually, let's get rid of this too. I need to fix this formatting in a second. I don't think it's quite right. Make sure we have an opening parentheses here to get this correct. For the key, we'll just pass in the index. And this sidecar skeleton can actually be self-closing because we literally don't need any of this content down here. So what I can do is just pretty much close all of this. Let's literally delete all of this. Don't need it. And we can simplify this code down way more. We don't need either of these class names, so we'll go ahead and remove them. And then let's just fix this styling here. Looks like this div is the closing for here. But I think we're just missing a curly bracket. So let's go ahead and add this. And this parentheses should not be needed. Actually, that's a lie. It should. That's our return. Let's track these real quick. So that's the opening and closing there. We have this. Maybe we're missing this. Looks like we're missing a parentheses here. So yeah, now that we have that, this should be good. We'll make sure to import the sidecar skeleton so we have the right reference. And now, minus these few fields up here, this is all that our actual side panel skeleton is going to be. We're going to replace these with skeletons in just a second, but all it is just a mapping of our sidecar skeletons to make it look one-to-one how our actual panel is. Now, the very last thing is just this number right here. This data.list.aqi is obviously not going to be in our skeleton, so let's go ahead and inspect the actual number just to see kind of how big it's going to be. Looks like it's always going to be height 48, so 48 divided by 12. We can just get one more of our skeletons here. 48 divided by 12 should be 4, so let's replace this a skeleton of height 4. And then the width, this is going to be the width of the whole entire thing, but the skeleton shouldn't be that whole width. So we'll just say, but for the actual number itself, let's also do a width of 48. So 48, oops, this should be not 4, it should be 12. And since they'll both be 12, we can just say size 12. And we'll go ahead and import skeleton. And now we should have a fully functional skeleton for the entire side panel. So I can finally show you what this looks like. Let's close out of here. And let's go ahead and go back to our side panel. And now, after all that work, we can finally plug in our fallback component for this suspense, which you will just say is side panel skeleton, just like this. Now, if we go ahead and save it, this should be a fully functional suspense. If I go over to our map and I click somewhere, you can see all these cards go into suspense mode, into their skeletons, and they come back with the data on them. One thing, however, that's immediately obvious is that we can't really see our skeletons inside of each card because they're the exact same color as the card itself. So what we can do is we can go into the side card skeleton here. And what I'll do is just add BG sidebar on each of these. So we make our color a little bit different than the actual card itself. I'll throw that on each one of our skeletons here. And we'll go ahead and refresh this page. I'm not sure why it crashed there. Looks like we forgot the BG sidebar on the slider here. So let's add it to this one. And now if we save it and we go somewhere else, you can see our skeletons look pretty nice. It's still a pretty subtle dark. It's not really super noticeable. However, I don't think that's a big deal. I think if it was too dark, I think it would look a little bit out of place. And now everything appears to be working like clockwork. I click, we suspend the whole panel, show the skeleton cards, and as soon as the data is ready, it comes in and it looks great. Now pretty much everything in our app, including the side panel and also all of our cards down here, are all going to have skeleton loaders, so it looks super crisp whenever we load any new data in. Alright, so what's the next step for this app? Well, we're getting very close to the end here. For almost this whole video, we've kind of just sat these cards in this super ugly looking column. I mean, we just have a single column on the page here, and let's be honest, it looks kind of bad. Because we've essentially just been ignoring this container formatting here the entire video to make the actual content, but now I think we're at a great point in the video to finally address it. Especially because we just added the side panel, and now if we hover over this, or we open it up, now it just looks even more awkward because it looks like we're trying to just cram a ton of stuff in one page, and it doesn't really look super professional. So with that being said, let's finally address the issue of styling these cards and this dashboard in general to look good and work in conjunction with this side panel here, along with responsive design. As part of that, we'll make sure the dashboard and the side panel both look great together on all screen sizes, and just make sure that they can look good on any possible device. The dashboard structuring plus responsive design isn't going to be super challenging. We'll just have to be careful and pay extra attention to the layout of all the divs and whatnot that we have. So without wasting any more time talking, let's get started on this. Now we're going to go ahead and shrink the VS Code window down to make more room for us on this page. This entire video that we've done so far, we've had the entire website over here, just kind of in that little narrow view, but now let's make it actually wide so we can see what it really looks like. And it's obvious that right away with this bigger view, it looks pretty bad. So what we can do, and how I normally do responsive design, is if you open up the DevTools here, you can actually, let's shrink this down a little bit. You can open this button right here in the Chrome DevTools that puts it into responsive mode, and that looks absolutely horrendous, but we'll ignore that for a second. Essentially, I use this responsive mode most of the time, where you can kind of just take the width, and you can resize it, and you can see exactly how it looks at every possible screen size. Now, in terms of the side panel here, every single app that we have is going to be slightly different in terms of when and where we actually show the side panel. But generally, if you're using tailwind breakpoints, the sidebar should collapse around the MD or LG breakpoint. So LG is 1024 and MD is 768. So usually around that part, if you're shrinking down from, big to small, around those numbers and width is generally where you would close the sidebar to make more room for the actual content since it's getting skinnier and skinnier. For our use case, since we have a decent amount of stuff to show on this dashboard, let's err on the side of caution and say that if we are below the large breakpoint, the side panel will be automatically collapsed with the option of opening it and closing it like we already have. And then if it's above LG, it will always be on the screen and it won't be collapsible, meaning the side panel and the dashboard will be showing at the exact same time. And again, like I said, the large breakpoint or LG is 1024 pixels in width. So if you look at our DevTools here, when I'm in this responsive mode, it actually gives me the width in this number up here. So right now we're at 1241. And if I just start shrinking it down, you can see that number adjust. So 1024 is going to be at roughly this width here. And at this width is where we're going to change how the side panel behaves. Because the way that we originally coded the side panel, how it already behaves is that it opens up over the dashboard. So we already have the case where it's under 1024 pixels taken care of. But now we need to fix whenever it's over 1024 and we want to show both at the same time. So usually what this means, the way I go about doing this, is having some sort of CSS variable that controls the width of the actual side panel. And then when we're calculating the width of the dashboard, we just subtract the width of the side panel from it. That way they can fit on the screen together. I'll show you what I mean by that. So let's actually close out of all these files here. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I know it might be a bit harder to see, but since we have a smaller window here, I think it'll definitely be helpful to not be super zoomed in. And let's go to our index.css file here. And let's go to the very top here, to the root. And let's go above all these CSS variables, and let's add one for the sidebar width. So we'll do dash dash sidebar dash width, and we will say it is 23 rem wide. And now what we'll do with that is we will save it. Let's go to our side panel, and instead of having it hard coded to be width 90, we will just hard code it to instead be width of sidebar width, just like this. And now if we save it, it should be 23 rem. We go ahead and go into the inspect here, and we look at it. It looks like that's not quite right, I think, because this should be square brackets and not parentheses. So let's change that. Square brackets here. I think that should be good. As we have, let's see. Okay, my bad. I keep forgetting this new tailwind v4 syntax. We're going to just do it like this. And now there we go. If we save it, this should be 23 rem right here. Now that we have a defined width for the side panel that is based on a CSS variable that is global, let's now go back to app here. And right now, if we scroll to the outermost div of this dashboard, it should be this div right here. So we have essentially this div wrapping the whole entire dashboard and then the side panel. So this div right now is going to be width full. Technically it's width auto, but it has no constrained parent. So by default, it's always going to be the width of the entire screen. So what we can do on here, just to be explicit, is we'll say width full by default because on small screens, we still want it to be width full. But once we're above the LG breakpoint, so we can do it like this, we want our width to actually be a calc of, let's say 100 dVW, which is basically the screen. It's 100% of the device width. We do that minus the sidebar width. And now if we do it like this, we're saying on small screen sizes, we're still width full, but as soon as we get above 1024 pixels, then we want to have the entire dashboard be 100% of the screen minus however wide the sidebar is. And now if I go ahead and save it, you can see that everything shifts over. It looks a little busted because we don't have any padding yet for this entire dashboard, so everything's kind of just crammed together. So let's go in here, and we already have gap 8 for these individual items, but let's throw a P8 on here. Now if we go ahead and save it, it should look quite a bit cleaner. This map right here is still going to be weird because we have the hard-coded width value for the map. So let's actually go into our map component. And right now we have just width hard-coded to 1000 pixels and height as 500 pixels. However, for now, let's keep the height on here hard-coded how it is. And we will just say the width, instead of being 1000 pixels, will just be 100%. And now if we go ahead and save it and refresh this, the map should now also be constrained to this same dashboard div. And now we can clearly see that everything fits on this page. None of it is going underneath or over the side panel. Each section has its own space, which is exactly what we want for larger screens. However, once we go smaller, like we keep getting smaller and smaller until we eventually drop below the 1024 breakpoint, now we can close our side panel and this width can still be the full width of the screen, which is how almost all modern web apps are going to behave to some capacity. And ideally what should happen is whenever we're on larger screens like this, the side panel should open by default, and then once we get below the point of a large screen, so below 1024, then this side panel should also close automatically. So let's add that real quick. How we can do that is we can go back to our side panel here, and on this very top outermost class name, let's throw one more thing on it. Let's say when we're on large screens, so we're at 1024 pixels or above, then we're going to translate x0, meaning no matter what, if we are above LG, translate the side panel onto the screen. And we'll likely need to throw an important on here so that our side panel open state that we have right here doesn't try and override that. If we're on large screens, we don't care about this state literally at all. We're always going to have it on the screen, so we make sure it's important. And now if we go ahead and save this, let's start on a small screen size. And if we close the side panel and now we start expanding, we're eventually going to go over 1024. And now the side panel will just automatically open back up. And then what we can notice here is if I refresh it here, we're on a big screen, we start shrinking down. Notice how it's not going to close automatically. The way that we can get that to happen is we can actually just go to our app here. And right now we're defaulting this is side panel open to true. Let's just change it to false and see what happens. If I start it as false, do this. Now I go make our screen big, refresh just to make sure we're starting completely fresh. And now I start shrinking down. Side panel's open, and as soon as I hit 1024, boom, it closes and the dashboard expands. If I go back out, it does the same thing, and now I can go back and forth between them, and it works exactly the way that we want it to ensure responsive design. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that if we're on big screens here, we shouldn't be able to click this chevron at all. And in fact, if I try to, nothing's going to happen. And that's again because when we're on large or bigger screen sizes, we're always showing the side panel. So it doesn't make sense to have this chevron here when we're on large screens because obviously we don't want to show it if the user can't even click it. The super easy fix for that is to just go to where our chevron is here, which is right here. And all we have to do is add LG hidden. So by default, it won't be hidden, but as soon as we're at 1024 pixels or wider, it's going to be gone. So now save it, and now we have no more chevron. In that same vein, it doesn't make sense to show this hamburger icon either. Normally, this should only really show if we have the ability to open the sidebar. But again, on this screen size, we're big enough where it's always going to be open, so this hamburger icon doesn't do anything. So we'll just go to app, and we'll add the same exact thing to the hamburger icon. We'll go here, and right after ML Auto, let's just throw LG hidden, save it, and now when we're on this screen size, they'll be hidden. So now the chevron and the hamburger are both gone on the screen size. Because we can't open or close the side panel, it's just stuck right here. And now if we go small enough and we fall below 1024, now the hamburger is going to reappear. Our styling's messed up, so it's actually behind the side panel, which we'll fix in a second. However, I can close out of this here, and boom, you can see the hamburger is right here. So once we're a small enough screen size, we can still open and close this at will. But once we get big enough, those disappear, and we're just stuck with the side panel. Now that we have this, let's actually figure out what we're trying to do for the dashboard. After all, it's the most important part of our app, and we pretty much haven't styled it at all. I mean, the cards themselves and the data is styled, but the formatting of the cards and how they're positioned is just hard-coded to a single column. Which, you know, is completely fine if we're on like a mobile screen like this, because obviously we can't really have much more room to have more than a single column. However, when we have like more regular size, larger computer screens, having everything just be the width of the entire page just does not look very professional. And this is going to stem purely from the fact that if we look at this outermost div here, it's just set up to be a flex call. Instead of hard coding this to be flex call, I think we should do what most dashboards do to ensure they're responsive at all sizes, and that's using a grid. With a grid, we'll be able to change how many rows or columns each item takes up at different screen sizes and get way more flexibility and options instead of just being pigeonholed into a single column. So let's go ahead and get this div set up. First, we don't want this div that holds all of our drop downs and our hamburger icon to actually be included in this grid, because they're kind of off on their own thing. So I think that div is this div right here, but essentially everything from the map all the way down, so from here, not including this, but essentially here to here, all of this should be inside the grid. So essentially just the map and all these different cards that we have down here. So what I'll actually do is go back over here, Control-Shift-P, wrap, and we're going to wrap this all in a div, and we're going to give it a class name of grid. The next question to ask when setting up a grid is how many columns should this grid actually be? Well, when you're working with Tailwind responsiveness, sometimes it's easier to start with the small screen sizes and work your way up from there, because technically that's the way that Tailwind is built. The default styles that you want at the smallest screen sizes, you don't put any breakpoint on them, but as soon as you want to start getting bigger, that's when you specify the SM, MD, LG, and so forth. So let's actually do that, and we'll start from the smallest screen size. Let's set it to around, 600 or 700 in terms of width here. Let's just say, 650. At this screen size, we don't really have any more room to allow more than one column in this grid. I mean, essentially we're going to have each card take up the max width because we don't have a whole lot of width real estate to work with. So on this grid here, we'll say by default, this will be grid calls 1. If we go ahead and save the file like this, we are still in our column layout, although we lost all of our gap. So let's go ahead and just add gap 4 back on here to ensure we have proper spacing between our grid items. And this grid now looks perfectly fine for this screen size because it's super basic, just being a single column. So now let's start widening our window a little bit. Once we start to widen, and we get closer to the, 900 or 1000 width, starts to be the point where I think realistically we can fit more than just one column. We can keep the map as being the whole width because the map is kind of the focal point of the app. Plus we have some cards that are still pretty wide, but what I'm willing to bet is that the daily forecast here and also the current weather can most likely fit in the same row at this point instead of each having their own row. Especially this current weather card, because right now there's so much empty kind of like white space here on the card since it's all centered, and I think it looks a bit bad at this screen size. So I think what we can do here is just make the current weather fit on the left side of the column and the daily forecast fit on the right side of the column. And then aside from those two cards, everything else will still stay at the full width. And the way that we can specify how much space we want each grid item to take up is by specifying call span and row span on each of the items. And unfortunately, I can't just go in here and throw a class name on each of these suspense items and do like call span 4 on here, because suspenses don't take class names. So what I'll do here actually for each of these divs, for each of these sections, is I will actually wrap them in a div. So I'll wrap each one of these suspenses in a div here. That way we can get more specific with the styling, because we can give each one of these their own class name. So we'll do this one wrapped in a div, and we will wrap this last one in a div right here. And this div here for each one is essentially just going to represent the actual grid item for that card. So this is the grid item for our current weather, this is the grid item for our hourly forecast, and so forth. Now what we can do is we can say, by default, every single one of these is going to be call span 1. Now technically you don't need a class name to specify that, but to be explicit and to show you what I'm trying to do here, I'm going to write this on every single one. So we'll just add this call span 1 on all of these, so that by default, with no other conditions, every single one of these will take up one whole column. And that'll also be added to our map, so we'll add it to this div right here. Oops. We'll just add call span 1, throw it onto this already existing class name, and now we're just being explicit that each grid item is always going to be one column. However, I just mentioned that once we're around this point of being, 900 or so pixels in width, we're starting to have a bit more room. And I know that the medium breakpoint for Tailwind is 768 pixels in width, so I actually want to try that one first just to see how it looks. So what we'll do is on our grid here, we'll go up and we will say at medium or higher screen sizes, we want it to be grid calls 2. That way our entire grid is going to be 2 columns wide. Now if we go ahead and save this, everything is going to get super out of whack. And that's happening because all these grid items are still only spanning one column. So essentially what we need to do here is for all of these, we need to say when we're on medium or bigger screen sizes and we have 2 columns, we still want some of these to span the entire width. So we'll say call span 2 for the map, for example. And now if we do that, the map still goes the entire width. Let's take this and we'll add it to the map. We'll also add it to the hourly card, and we'll also add it to the additional info card. So these 3 will still take up the full width, Now, the only ones that aren't taking up the full width are going to be the current weather and the daily forecast. Because this hourly forecast card is now sitting between the current and the daily forecast, that means that these aren't ever going to connect. So to fix that for right now, let's take this daily forecast div and let's actually move it up to be directly below the current weather. And now, if we save it, we're getting somewhere. If I go ahead and shrink to around 800 width, where this breakpoint starts, right around here-ish, I think this still looks pretty good. Everything has plenty of breathing room. If I go to 900, still looks great. Nothing is stretched too crazy. So I actually think this format would work quite well, keeping everything mostly in one row, minus the current weather and the daily forecast. The only thing that's a little bit awkward right now is that this current weather card and the daily forecast are clearly not the same height. One way to fix this would be doing kind of a band-aid fix, but we could just go into the current weather card here, and we can add some extra spacing at the bottom. That way they're not off on the height. Meaning we could go on this card, we could add a class name on this, and we could add something like PB8, PB8 like this, and it should create some extra spacing on the bottom. It looks like that isn't quite enough, so let's actually change this to, I don't know, PB12, too much, 11 maybe? Yeah, let's do PB11, and that looks to be good. However, one thing is we want to make sure we don't mess it up on the other screen sizes because we already got it looking good on the small screens. So let's add MD to this. And we're saying only on medium and above screens do we want this extra padding to be there. So it's kind of a band-aid fix. I don't really love doing this, but this problem I think is only going to be happening on this particular screen size, so I don't think it's that huge of a problem. And now I think we're actually in the clear with this screen size. Let's go to the starting point again. Our starting point is 768, so once we're below that, we're going to have this single column layout. As soon as we get to 768, boom, mostly the same thing, minus the fact that now the current card and the daily forecast are side by side. And if we keep scaling up, 800 looks great, 900 looks great, 1000 looks great, and everything is still looking good. And just to double check, let's just make sure it's all smooth here. It looks like there's no points where it gets really weird or looks super ugly. In fact, I think it looks super nice all the way throughout all these transitions. It's just growing and shifting, and everything seems to be moving the way we want it to. Now that we know it looks good at this screen size, I'm going to shrink my VS Code to be even smaller, and I'm actually going to take these dev tools here, and I'm going to pop them out. So I'm going to go, oops, that is not the right thing there. What I'll do is I'll go here and just pop the dev tools out. That way it's not actually taking up space. And now if we expand this, we should be able to get as big as almost 1700 pixels. I think I went a bit overboard with shrinking VS Code down. So now I just hard coded this to 1600 pixels and we'll have a lot more real estate to work with. So going back to the size that we were just working around roughly the 800 to 1000 pixel range. And now let's keep working our way up. I think that once we cross the 1024 pixel point, I think it's definitely still smart to have current weather and daily forecast side by side and the other ones still in their own column. Because at this point, because the side panel just came back in, it doesn't make sense to switch it up. Because now we're again forced into a smaller size for our dashboard. So as soon as we get over 1024, we're actually losing quite a bit of real estate for our dashboard, at least in terms of the width that we have to work with. So this screen size should be good as is. Now if we keep scaling up here, we can notice we're obviously getting more and more real estate. And once we're at the, 1200 to 1300 mark here, I still don't really think there's a ton more we could do. Again, having the side panel here essentially collapses the dashboard real estate to be almost what it was before 1024. And actually, yeah, this size looks to be a little bit bigger than the size that we have here, because this side panel is now taking up actual space. But I would say once we keep stretching, and we get to the point where we're at about, probably at this point here, so around the 1500 pixel point in width, now we're starting to have quite a bit more real estate to work with, and might be able to fit more things into our grid, rather than just a mostly single column layout. And funny enough, 1536 is the last built-in tailwind breakpoint, and that's 2XL. So I think 2XL would actually be a great breakpoint for us to use for full-size computer screens. And let's be honest, nobody's really using 1280 by 720 screens anymore. Pretty much every computer device is going to be at least 1920 by 1080, meaning the width on all genuine computer screens will be at least 1920 pixels, so it will be included in this 2XL breakpoint. In other words, the view that we already have here is what most mobile devices are going to see, or tablets. The view that we're about to make at this 2XL breakpoint, once we get above 1536, is what most computers are going to see. So how should we now design this dashboard to look on computer screens? If we go back to the drawing board here, here's kind of what I was thinking. We'll assume this white space here is pretty much just our dashboard. I was thinking we would still have the map essentially take up the entire width of the dashboard. Again, I think that's fine because the map is kind of the focal point of our entire app. And then what I think we can do is we can have the current and daily weather cards go below it, but on opposite ends of the dashboard. So we'll have, let's say, the current weather card here, and then we will have the daily weather card right here, just like this. And then the last two cards that we have are the hourly forecast and the additional info. And we could put these two here kind of more long ways. We could say the hourly forecast is this one, and then the additional info could be this one, just like this. I don't think this will get super complicated, but we'll have to watch super carefully to make sure that we're setting up our grid properly. So looking at our sketch here, I think this can logically be broken down into 4 separate columns. Essentially, I'll draw red lines here for each of the columns. These aren't actually proportional, really. Actually, got a bit of a brighter color, so a brighter red here. So our first column is going to be kind of this line right here. These middle cards here are going to be 2 in width, so we'll say these are each 2 columns. And then we'll have kind of this layout. We're going to have essentially section 1, section 2, section 3, and section 4. With that being said, let's make this a reality. So it's 4 columns. So on our grid here, we're going to go, let's see, where's it at? Oh, wrong component. Let's go back to our app here. We have the grid. Grid calls 1 by default. On medium or higher, we're grid calls 2. And I just said on 2XL, so 1536 or higher, we want it to be 4 columns. And if I save it, it's of course going to screw up our layout pretty bad because we haven't told each of the grid items how many columns each of them should span. And also, because of the way that I drew out the sketch, we're not only going to want to control the horizontal spacing, so the calls, I also want to control the vertical spacing as well. So we're going to also throw 2XL grid rows 4. That way we can think about this grid like a 4x4. And that's going to make things easier if we have an actual defined height and width for each one. Let's start with the map. I mentioned in our sketch that the map should really still just be the whole width of the entire dashboard. So let's first throw a 2XL. We're going to say it should be call span 4 to take up the whole width of the grid. Go ahead and save it, and we've already achieved that. I also think not only should the map take up the entire width of the dashboard, I think it would make sense to take up half the height as well. That way the first half of the dashboard height is just the map, and the second half is the rest of our cards. So with that being said, we know that our grid is going to be 4 rows tall. So we'll say this at 2XL is going to be a row span of 2, because 2 is half of 4, so we'll take up 50% of the height. Go ahead and save it. Now everything is going to look a bit whack. Part of the reason for that is because our grid doesn't have a defined height, so it doesn't really know what to base it off of. However, it's logical to assume that this dashboard is going to take up the entire height of the screen at this size. So let's go to the outermost dashboard div here, which is this div, and let's just throw a h full on it. That way it's the height of the screen. And actually, sorry, not h full, it should be h screen. And it should only be confined to the height of the screen on 2XL or higher, so we'll say 2XL height screen, just like this. We also need to fix the fact that if we go back to our map here, this height is still hard-coded to 500 pixels. So now that we have a defined height for the grid, let's set this to 100% as well. That way we shouldn't have to worry about a hard-coded size messing things up. Go ahead and save it, and let's refresh this. And now our map is going to look a bit weird still, but we're getting better. The reason it's so big right now is because these cards aren't spaced properly. So right now this map is technically half the height of the rest of this height, but all this is overflowing still, so it looks really bad. So now let's fix the rest of these cards. Remember in the design, I said that the map should be half the height of the entire dashboard, meaning the rest of these 4 cards here have essentially 2 columns more of height to work with for all 4 of them. So let's now look at our current weather card. Right now it's only spanning 1 column, which actually works out because that's exactly what we want on the screen size. However, we want it to take up half the height of the grid, so we'll also, just like the map, say this should be 2XL, row span 2, just like this. And for a second, real quick, I'm going to skip daily forecast. If we look at hourly forecast, I mentioned that both the hourly and the additional info should both span 2 columns to make room for the other cards on the side. So each of these is actually going to take a 2XL, call, span 2, so they each take up 2 columns of horizontal width. We'll take it on this one, and we'll also throw it on the additional info one like this to make sure they are spaced properly in terms of their width. But actually, funny enough, I just realized we already have that for the MD. This actually is not needed at all because it'll still apply to the 2XL breakpoint, so we're actually perfectly fine as is. However, looking back at our design, we want both the hourly forecast and the additional info to look pretty short, so that when you add the height of the hourly forecast and the additional info card together, you get the height of the current weather card. Current weather card is 2, which should mean that each of these little smaller cards, the hourly forecast and additional info, should be a height of 1. So what we'll do for that is we'll say on 2XL, we're going to say it should be a row span of 1 to give us some more vertical height. We'll throw it on here, and we'll also throw it on here, both the hourly and the additional info. Go ahead and save it, and that should adjust the height of those cards. However, it's still going to look really bad for one particular reason. These cards are now super out of order. In our layout, everything just reads from left to right. Meaning if we look back to our sketch, the actual ordering of the elements should be the map first, then the current weather card, and then the hourly forecast, then the daily forecast, and then the additional info at the very end. What that essentially means is that our hourly forecast right here and our daily forecast would have to swap positions in the JSX. However, if we simply do that, we're going to mess it up how it looks at these smaller screen sizes because we already made the ordering work for this. So lucky for us, grids have a pretty convenient way to handle the ordering of things, especially at different screen sizes. Tailwind has a property called order that you can use that specifies the actual order of things. So let's smack order on each of these in the default order that they're in, so matching the JSX. For the map up here, which is this div, we will just give this an order of 1. We'll take this essentially for each one. We'll say map is 1. This one is going to be 2, the current weather card. Daily forecast is going to be order 3. Hourly is going to be 4. And additional info is going to be 5. Now, this is self-explanatory, and this by itself doesn't actually do anything because they're already in this exact order. However, on 2XL, we need the order to switch slightly. So what we can do to make sure the daily and the hourly swap positions, we can say normally this is order 3, but once we're on 2XL screen size, we're going to make this order 4. And we'll do the exact opposite for the hourly forecast. So we'll say normally it's order 4, but on 2XL or higher screen sizes, we'll make it order 3. And now if we go ahead and save it, our dashboard is almost going to look normal. Not quite, but it's getting there. Go ahead and refresh just to make sure. And yeah, so we clearly have some spacing issues still, but the overall kind of grid layout is actually how we want it. However, we might have an actual problem now. So we made our map essentially be height auto because we did the height and width of 100%. However, this is going to cause problems if we're on a really small screen size, because now there's no actual defined width or height, the map has no idea essentially how it needs to size itself. So what we'll do is we'll go to the grid item that's actually holding the map here, which should be this right here, this div. What we're going to do is we're going to say, let's give it height 120 when we're on small screen sizes, and then only at 2XL or higher, then we'll do height auto. That way, once we're on this screen size, it still looks fine. However, once we go bigger, now it can do the auto sizing. So let's keep expanding and get to our bigger screen size here. And again, we still have a really weird spacing issue because this stuff down here is way too tall and out of place, so it's making our map also look super tall. I think part of the reason this is happening is because this additional weather info card is a bit too tall, so it's causing some weird spacing issues. So let's actually go into that component real quick. Close our other components, and we will go into additional info. Right now, this additional info card is just hard-coded to be a flex call, so everything is very vertical. In our design, we have this additional weather info card being quite a bit wider than it is tall, so I think in that case, we should make it not a singular column, but maybe like a 3x2. So we'll have, for example, the cloudiness, UV index, and wind direction in one column, and then the pressure, sunrise, and sunset in the next column. The easiest way that we can do that is by still maintaining this on smaller screen sizes by just making this a grid, but just giving it grid calls 1. So by default, it is still a singular column, but on, let's say, medium screens or higher, then it's going to be grid calls 2. And the reason I'm doing MD and not 2XL is because I think there would still be plenty of space on medium as well. So if I go ahead and save it, I think it looks decent here, being 2 columns instead of 1. And if I, for a second, shrink down to a smaller size, I also think this still looks completely fine, being 2 columns and not just 1. If we go smaller though, below 768, now it'll go into the vertical layout. Let's go back to our super big screen size for a second. And even though now it's 2 columns, we still have this really weird spacing issue going on. The thing that's immediately obvious to me is that our grid is overflowing the page. As you can see here where the background of the page cuts off, is right roughly in the middle of this hourly forecast card. And that's where the grid should actually cut off as well. But the grid content is just way overflowing it. We need to make sure our grid takes up all of the space in this dashboard that is given, so basically the entire dashboard and no more. The way that we can actually do that is we can go to our app here, we can go to the div that has our grid on it, and we can actually throw a flex1 on it. The grid's immediate parent is already flex call. So by throwing flex1 on this div, the grid, we're giving this grid permission to grow to fill the rest of the space that it has. If we save it, however, it's still going to be messed up, nothing changed. But I want to show you some magic here. If for whatever reason in a flex call layout, flex1 by itself is not working, go on the div that has flex1 and throw a min h0 on it, and that will actually fix your spacing issues. I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know why min height 0 works for flex1 like this, but I've used this trick a bunch of times and it's saved my life quite a bit. In the same vein, if you have a flex row, you can also use min width 0 to achieve the same effect. Sometimes having that min height or that min width actually saves the flex1 and makes it behave properly. Having this flex1 and min h0 here shouldn't affect the styles and other screen sizes, but just to be sure, let's make sure they only apply when we're on 2XL or higher. So we'll add 2XL to both of these. Because we've already got the smaller screen sizes looking good, I wouldn't want to regress and mess these ones up. And now this is going to fix our grid sizing problem. It looks like our grid now is the actual height that it should be. However, we still have this kind of awkward gap between the hourly forecast and the additional weather info. For some reason, there's just this spacing here that makes it look really awkward. I think what the issue is, we're noticing we have that gap between those, and also if you look below the current weather and the daily forecast cards, we also have some gap where the cards aren't even getting close to touching the bottom of the screens. And I suspect the reason for that is if we go into our shared card component, these cards don't actually have a fixed height, so they're only going to be as tall as their content is. However, on this screen size, I want these cards to take up the entire height of each of their grid cells. So what I can do is throw one more class name on here on these cards and say at 2XL, I want them to be height full. Now if I go ahead and save it, they'll take up the entire height that they're supposed to. It looks like that fixed them, except for the fact that the daily forecast card is now only 1 tall. So actually, let's close this, look back at our daily forecast here. And we forgot to throw a row span on here, so let's go ahead and do that. We'll say 2XL, row span 2, the same styles that are on our current weather column. Go ahead and save it, and now it should be looking good. The only issue that adding hfull inadvertently caused is that now on some of our cards, we have some awkward space at the bottom that just looks a bit out of place. Like for example, this current weather card here has way too much spacing at the bottom. That doesn't quite look right. One thing that we could do is we could go again, actually back to our card components here. Let's go to card.tsx, and we have this children class name. Let's go ahead and add one more utility on here. Let's say that on 2XL screen size, so on this screen size, we're going to give these flex1, meaning that at 1536 or above, the children of the card need to fill the rest of the space that they're given. So we can go ahead and save this, and now what we could do is go to each of our individual cards, like for example, let's say the daily forecast. We can go onto the children class name here, and we can say something like 2XL, justify between, and now these will evenly space out and fill the remaining content of the card in terms of the height. And we can do the exact same thing for current weather. So let's go to current weather. On the children class name here, we will throw 2XL, justify between like this, and it again spaces them out. And this works because these cards are both flex call, so if we do justify between, it'll space them out to fill all the remaining height. And then the very last thing would just be to fix some of the awkward spacing on the hourly forecast card, because there's just this empty space kind of chilling at the bottom, which I don't think looks very good. What we could do is we could close both these files here. We could go into our hourly forecast and go to the div that's mapped out for each hour, and we could throw a 2XL, justify between, which would stretch the items to actually match the height. However, now since we added some more space between each of the items, let's scale everything up slightly in size. So what we'll do is we'll go to both these P tags right here, and we're just going to throw a 2XL, scale 110. Again, I want to reiterate the fact that I'm using 2XL here a lot, just to be sure that I don't mess it up as smaller screen sizes. I only want these changes to apply on this big screen size, hence why I'm using the breakpoints. So we'll do 2XL, scale 110 right here. We'll also add the exact same thing on this P tag down here. So we'll add that. And now if we go ahead and save it, now the text is scaled up to look slightly more appropriate. And lastly, we'll just scale up our weather icon. We know the weather icon takes in a custom class name if we want to control the size. So what we could do is just give it a class name here, and we will say at 2XL, instead of being size 8 by default, we want it to be, I don't know, size 10. Now if we save it, the icons are going to get a bit bigger. And now with these changes, our dashboard actually looks great. Before we call it good on the responsive design, let's test every breakpoint and make sure we're looking good at every single screen size. On this computer screen size that we've been at for a while, our side panel looks great. If we try and scroll down, we can't because this all fits on the dashboard. Let's start now scaling down. The second we drop below 1536, so obviously here is 1537, so we're at 2XL. The second we drop below it, now we go to this format where current weather card and daily forecast are side by side, but the rest is still width full. Now if we keep going down, let's keep shrinking, and let's see how this adjusts. Still everything's looking great. And eventually if we keep going to 1024, the sidebar is going to drop out, and now we have plenty of real estate left for our dashboard, and we can open and close the sidebar at will. If we keep getting smaller, so eventually we'll hit below 768, eventually we go to just a single column layout for everything, which is standard for most small screens. And we're going to notice actually, if we start to get too small, it starts to look really horrendous. Phone screen sizes are going to be about, I think, 400-ish pixels. So if I go on like an iPhone right now and look at this, this looks completely unusable. This looks horrible. Go back to our responsive mode here and go slightly. It looks like around the, 700-ish mark, it starts to get to this point where the actual sizing of the dashboard starts to disconnect from the rest of the screen. And what I think is happening is we haven't really touched the styling of the header at all. This header has kind of just been chilling here. And my guess is that the CSS is trying to make the page account for the header width, so we get this horrible looking space start to just scale between our cards and the side of the screen. Let's go ahead and fix this real quick. Let's head back over to our dashboard component, and let's just go ahead and collapse this entire grid here, just so it's easier to see what's going on with just the header alone. So we'll go ahead and reopen that, and we'll focus on these couple of divs right here. First of all, this has been bothering me for a little bit. I actually want to change this hamburger to size 6 instead of size 8, just to make it a bit smaller. One of the issues we're having with this header that you can see already right here is this map type is wrapping, and it's not something we want. Ideally, it always just stays like this where it's in one row and doesn't just wrap down like this, because then it starts to get a bit awkward. So let's go ahead and go to the H1 that has map type, and we will just throw a white space no wrap on it. That way, that is never going to be a problem. Now, no matter how much we go big or small, it always just stays in one line. Now, the recurring trend you're going to notice is whenever things get small on a screen, generally we go to a single column layout. So having both these drop downs in a row together gets a little bit weird when we want to get really small. Because if I get to, say 500 pixels, both the location and the map type drop downs are just super cramped. And to me, it doesn't make sense to actually have them like this. I think that once we're at a small enough screen size, these drop downs should go to a flex call format so they're lined up vertically instead of being in a row. If we go ahead and start bigger, let's see at what point these start to become bad. It looks like it's mostly okay right here. And then roughly around this point, around the 768 breakpoint here, is when it starts to kind of all fall apart. We lose the hamburger and the sizing starts getting weird. What we can do in this case is go to this div right here that has flex gap 8 that holds both the drop downs and the labels. What we can do is we can say by default, we want it to be flex call. However, once we're on medium screens or higher, then we want it to be flex row. And because we'll be vertical on smaller screens, let's take away this gap 8. Let's actually make it gap 2 when we're vertical. And then once we are horizontal, so we're on MD, let's say it is just gap 4. And now if we save it, it's still fine on this screen. However, once we get small enough, then it goes to the column layout instead of being rows. So it gives us way more room to work with, and we don't have to worry about it getting super cramped. Obviously, you can see the hamburger is now completely busted because it's just kind of sitting off screen here on the right. Let's address that in a second, and for now, keep scaling down. If we go farther and farther down, this header is still going to be overflowing. It looks like only once we get to the point of, it's about like 500-ish. You can see the hamburger starts to kind of come back into the screen here. So like, right here-ish. But before then, the header is still overflowing because this hamburger, you can see it's getting cut off. However, the problem is right now, with the size that we're working at, there's no breakpoint below 640. 640 is actually SM, so essentially if we're working below 640, we can't make any more breakpoints under here. However, I lied because we can actually use our own custom breakpoints and we can define them ourselves. So how we can do that, for example, is by going into our index.css and finding the block here should be at the bottom. That is just this right here. That is just at theme. We can add our own custom breakpoint by going into here and saying dash dash breakpoint dash, we'll call it XS for extra small, and set it to 500 pixels. Just like we add colors by specifying the color, like for these, or for radius, we can do the exact same thing with breakpoints. And we're just setting this particular breakpoint to 500 pixels, and we can now use it like any other breakpoint. So if we go ahead and close this and head back to our app now, what we'll actually do is for this div we have right here that we added our stuff to, let's actually take this and let's apply this only on the inner divs. So on this one and on this one. And I'll show you what we're doing here in just a second. So let's take this, throw it on these two. And now that we made that custom breakpoint being XS, let's actually use XS on this div. We will go ahead and keep it flex call. But we're going to say once we're at XS or higher, then it should go flex row. We'll also say we can maintain the gap 8 that we already had once we're at that big enough screen size. If we go ahead and save it, we can see this is the change that it just made. It's still in a row because we're above 500, but if we get below it now here, now it drops down to a column. And we lost the gap here between these two things. Let's make sure to keep a, gap 4 right here, just to create that spacing. So it goes to the columns here. But once we're here, it's still in the row format. And I think this way right here might be one of the better ways to go about it. So as you can see already, our screen isn't shrinking nearly as soon as it was before. We're not getting that weird thing where the size is actually disconnecting from the rest of the page. There's still some problems obviously, but we have that main problem fixed now. Just to make sure it looks fine on bigger screens, if I go out here, it still looks the way that we want it. Now it just shrinks down once we run out of space, and then shrinks down again. Let's fix these last couple of things. First of all, when we're at this small of a screen size, it doesn't make sense for these dropdowns to take up just a little bit of the width. I think when we're at this small a screen, we need to make these dropdowns right here take up the entire width of the screen. So what we can do, for example, is go to location dropdown, and right now it's just hard-coded to be 180 pixels. So what we can do for that is we can say we still want to maintain that exact size if we're at or above 500 pixels. However, if we're below that, then let's just make it width full. And now this will be the full width of the screen. And we'll do the exact same thing for the other dropdown, which is the map type dropdown. So go in here, 500 or above, it's width 180 pixels. Otherwise, we want it to be width full. Go ahead and save it. And now they're both the full width of the screen. And now the last obvious problem that we have to fix is this hamburger right here just looks awful sitting here. It's just kind of chilling in a super bad spot. And that's because this overall div layout right here is still flex call. And also the hamburger is ML auto, which means it's going to go in the third column below the other two and be right aligned, so it just looks horrible. What really needs to happen at this point, which most apps actually should do, is once we're small enough, we should probably have a separate header component and not try to make everything just fit. Because at a certain screen size in most apps, trying to cram header stuff into the body gets really weird. So for example, this hamburger button is normally something that would be on the header. When we're at big enough screen sizes, it's just here kind of sitting at the top. But once we get smaller and we start getting more specific with how we're wrapping this stuff, having the hamburger there just doesn't make any sense at all. Because right here, it's just super out of place. So what I can actually do is go to this button that has the hamburger. I'm going to give it a class name of hidden by default. So for us small enough screens, it won't even be there. But at XS, so once we're at 500 pixels or higher, then we will make it block. That way it's going to appear visible. If we go ahead and save it, that already makes our page look a lot better with that hamburger not being there. Now that we have this, let's make a completely separate mobile header component where we can put the hamburger in. So I'll go to our file explorer over here, go to our components and make a new one that I will just call mobileheader.tsx. Go ahead and close this. TSRC to make the component. And let's make some basic styles here. Let's set up this div. We're going to say class name is going to be width full to take up the full screen space. And let's just hard code it to something like H16. E4 to give it some nice padding. And we'll also give it BG background. Normally I wouldn't want the background of my header to be the exact same as my dashboard, but in this case I think it may actually look better this way. And lastly, we'll just throw sticky top 0 on this. That way it'll always be stuck to the top of the page. The reason why I'm using sticky and not fixed is that sticky will make this header take up space in the DOM, so I don't have to worry about shifting everything else down. If I were to do fixed, for example, I'd have to shift stuff around to make it look good. Sticky is just easier in this case. Now let's go ahead and put some content in here instead of just having mobile header. So what we'll do is we'll go into here and we will actually copy and paste our hamburger button into this mobile header. We don't have access to hamburger in here, so let's go into app. Let's find the import for hamburger. It should be right here. Go ahead and copy it and paste it. That way we have the hamburger. And it's important to remember that the reason that we made this whole component was to only show it on small screens. So essentially, if we're over 500 pixels in size, we actually don't want to show it at all. So let's just do excess hidden, just like this. So anything above 500 pixels, we'll be hiding this component entirely. I also now just don't have the set is side panel open. So let's go ahead and comment out this on click for just a second. Now let's go ahead and save this. Let's go to our app here and let's render out mobile header up here and just see what it looks like. Save it like this. And here's what we have. Just so we can see it, let's actually go in here. Let's make sure we'll remove BG background for a second. Make sure it is BG red 500. So we can see it up here. It looks like, oh yeah, we don't care about these other styles now, like hidden and XS block. So let's go ahead and just get rid of this. And we can also get rid of this LG hidden. And let's change this back to BG background. Go ahead and save it. And here's what this actually looks like now. You can see that as we scroll, this should stay at the top of our screen. Looks like it's not. Actually, yeah, it looks like it's not there. It stays fixed for a little bit. Actually, before we do that, let's fix a few other things. First of all, this hamburger should be on the far right of the header, not the very beginning. Instead of relying on ML Auto to do that, we could actually remove that. We can just say flex, justify end, and that should make it align to the right side. And just to make sure this header goes over our map, let's give it a z-index of 1001. However, if we start scrolling, we'll still notice the header is not quite staying fixed the way that we want it to, or sorry, staying sticky. And we've seen it for a little while now, but we have this weird little side scrolling issue where it seems like the width of the page is just more than what we actually have. We go ahead and refresh this just to make sure. Looks like, yeah, it's still there. So let's try and fix that. I think the issue may be that in our app here, we have this W full. Let's go ahead and just get rid of that. And I think this actually might fix the problem. Not 100% confident. No, that did not fix it. Okay, well, I closed and reopened the responsive DevTools, and now it's working perfectly fine, so I guess that's a non-issue. I'm not really sure why it was doing that. Let's fix the sticky thing real quick. Actually, that one also appears to be fixed. Might have just been the responsive DevTools. Sometimes these DevTools, when you're in responsive mode, stuff just kind of bugs out and doesn't quite work properly. But now, whether we go up or down, the header appears to be sticky because it's not moving at all. It's always staying at the very top of the screen because you can see the hamburger staying fixed, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so now the last thing that we should actually need in here is to make this hamburger button actually functional. We just commented out the on click. Let's actually uncomment this. And we know this is a piece of state that is in the parent of this component, so let's just pass it down as props. We'll say that it is expecting type. I don't know if I typing that out. We're going to say this, which we know is just going to be a dispatch of set state action. And that's going to be a Boolean. Dispatch is, of course, imported from React. And then we will extract this out of here. Now save this. It should be good to go. But we'll go ahead and pass it down now. Set is side panel open to set is side panel open. And now, if we go ahead and save it, go back here, this hamburger should work the exact way we expect it to. We can now open and close the side panel at this small screen size. So now, what's really cool with this mobile header is that once we're on big enough screen sizes, it doesn't even show up. So now we're at 550, so we're above the XS breakpoint, so this entire component is just hidden. We still have the hamburger right here. That works the exact way that we want it to. But now, when we go below small enough sizes, we actually render out a separate header component that has the hamburger in it that works in the exact same way. Pretty cool. One thing we should quickly fix is there's a bit too much spacing, I think, here between the bottom of the header and where this first map type dropdown is. It looks like there's just some awkward kind of space there, because if we go to our app and look at this, it is using P8 all the way around. And I think that's normally fine, except when we're on this screen size, it just looks like it's too much. So let's actually change this. Let's say the others can be P8, so the left, right, and bottom, but the top should actually be, we'll say PT4, but then on big screen sizes, we'll still be fine with PT8. So XS, PT8, just like this. And if we go and save it, I think that looks a bit better, not having so much padding at the top. So essentially, PT, right here, padding top, is more specific than just padding. So PT4 is going to override P8 normally. However, once we get to XS, we default back to PT8. Let's now go through a couple of different small sizes just to see how everything works, especially on mobile. So right now we're on responsive. Let's go to iPhone SE. It looks like right here, everything looks almost great, except for the fact that especially this map legend right here, is just completely out of place. It's just way too big. So what we'll do actually is go to that map component, which should be the map legend. Right now it's hard coded at width 96. Let's say only do that if we are on XS or higher. Otherwise, let's just do it as half that width, so we'll do width 48. Now go ahead and save it, and that looks quite a bit more manageable. If we get back to testing this, we know that scrolling this still works perfectly fine. If I go click on this, it opens the side panel just the way that we want it to. And it looks like all this is working beautifully. Just out of curiosity, let's go to landscape, and here we can see it also looks good. I can scroll down here, see all of our cars that are width full, and everything appears to be in order. I'm not a graphic designer, so I'm sure there's ways to make this look even better. And maybe there's certain cases or things that I'm not thinking about, but that's something that could be added if you wanted to make improvements to this app. If we just go back to portrait mode, let's go ahead and change this to, I don't know, pixel 7. Should be a bit bigger, but same kind of idea. Our drop downs still work perfectly. Our side panel opens the way that we expect it to. Our map works. We can click on it, load some data in, go over here. Let's say I want to know somewhere near Vietnam, go here. All that works perfectly. Then we have our cars down here, same thing, and they all look great. This still scrolls horizontally, so it appears to be working right, and everything else just looks super tidy. Now let's put this back in responsive mode and go through these breakpoints one last time. So we're small here, we know what this looks like, we've just been messing with this. Mobile header, all this works very smoothly. If we start expanding it, we get over 500, mobile header goes away, and now the hamburger plus the drop downs are all in the same div. And everything looks good, all in a single column layout. We eventually hit 768 here. We're now still single column for the most part, but these go to double column. Keep going, and it looks to be good. Side panel reappears, we hit the large breakpoint, and everything is just as we intended to be. Now there's just one final thing I want to do in terms of responsive design. That's going to be for our desktop view. If we go back to having this desktop view, the view still looks great. However, one thing that we're going to notice is if we start collapsing the height, this view is going to start looking kind of bad pretty quick. As you can see already right here, the stuff is already overflowing out of the grid. So it's getting like this, stuff's getting cramped together, and suddenly it starts looking real bad. The reason why the other screen sizes are fine and don't have this same problem is because this screen size at 2XL is the only one that has an actual defined height. It's supposed to be the height of the screen. So on other screen sizes, it's expecting it to overflow, that's fine, but on here it's not, and that's why it's causing this weird visual shift. Now, it's worth noting that this is probably not going to be a very common occurrence. I mean, this aspect ratio is pretty out of whack. It's quite a bit wider than it is tall, but certain laptop screens I've noticed especially can kind of have these weird dimensions where the aspect ratio is like a 21:9, or something that actually does get quite a bit wider than it is tall, so you end up having this really weird layout shifting stuff that happens because you're at an aspect ratio that you're not probably testing all that often. Because, like I said, this situation is likely an edge case, I don't think we need to start reordering grid items and making this more complex than we have to. It looks like at about, roughly, if we keep going down, roughly 1080 pixels in height here, it starts to get a little bad. Actually, not even that. It's more like, I would say like 1120 pixels starts to look kind of rough. What we can do as a quick band-aid to that is we can go to our app here. We can go to the div that has this 2XL height screen. And on here, we're just going to add a min height. We're going to say 2XL. It's going to be min height 1100 pixels. Actually, we'll do 1120 just like that. Now we go ahead and save it. And this will be the min height so that if we go below this, we'll just have to overflow. No more trying to cram everything all together in the screen height. If it gets too small for whatever reason, we can just start scrolling. The big thing with responsive design is the width. That's why all the breakpoints are width based. You know, SM, MD, LG, they're all based on the width of the viewport, not the height. When you start worrying about the height, things get a little bit weirder. You can use height breakpoints, or you can just do something like this, where things scroll if the width to height ratio gets out of whack. And that, ladies and gentlemen, should wrap it up for responsive design. Now that we've tested practically every screen size, it is safe to say our app is pretty responsive. Maybe not 110% perfect, maybe not completely flawless, but it does look great on each screen size, and we've verified we have no major issues with it. Again, I'm sure there's improvements to be made here and there if you'd like to on your own time, but now that we have this looking great, let's move on. Before we move on to the very last thing, we made some changes to our cards like daily forecast and current weather, but we didn't update our skeleton cards with those changes. If we don't make these components match one-to-one in terms of how their size and how they look, we can get some weird mismatch problems. So let's add those real quick. Let's open both the current weather card and the current weather skeleton. So we'll open this here and the current skeleton. And you'll notice because we added stuff to the children class name of current weather, it's going to be different from this children class name. So let's actually take this whole thing and just copy it over to make sure it still matches up perfectly one-to-one. We wouldn't want that to get out of whack. We'll do the exact same thing for the daily forecast. So we'll close these here, go to daily skeleton, and we will also go to daily forecast. You can see this class name's obviously been changed. So let's take this, copy it, and then just copy it over to the children class name here to make sure they are perfect one-to-one. We'll also do the exact same thing for hourly forecast and hourly skeleton, except we shouldn't have to change the children class name. We open this here, and we also open this. The only things that we actually added was, first of all, this 2XL justify between. So let's take this and add it to this div right here. And then we also just need to take the scales that we changed. So we made this 2XL scale 110 on both the P tags. So I'll make sure to throw that on these two. And then this skeleton went from size 8 to being size 10 for 2XL. So we'll take this and we will go ahead and throw that just on here. And now these should also match up one-to-one. And it seems like I might have forgot, but while we're here, let's make sure this is rounded full because it should be circular since it's an icon. And lastly, let's look at the additional info card. So we'll go into this and we will also go into the additional info skeleton. Looks like all we changed in here was this children class name. So let's take this, copy it, and we'll go ahead and paste it over. And now, taking into account our responsive changes, our skeleton loaders should match their actual components one-to-one. No matter what screen size we're on, whether it's SM, MD, LG, 2XL, the skeleton loaders and their actual cards are going to match up perfectly. Alright, so we've come a super long way, and we have one final thing I want to do on this app before we call it done. And that's going to be making a toggle for light and dark mode. This is something that is becoming more and more common in modern apps, so I want to show you how it's done using Tailwind plus shadcn. We're going to have some help from shadcn on this one, especially with the styles that it gave us in the index.css file. But I'll explain exactly how this works, and I will show you every single step. First things first, let's get a switcher component set up that will actually toggle us between light mode and dark mode. If we head over to shadcn, they have a really nice switch component that I think we could use. It basically just works like this. You just toggle it back and forth, and in our case, because it's binary, we can just go between light mode, maybe on the left, and then dark mode on the right, or vice versa. Doesn't really matter. We'll go ahead, and this should be the last actual shadcn component we install. We'll take this command, go ahead and open our terminal here, make a new one, and we will add this switch, and now we have the switch in our app. So now that we have this, let's actually make the final component that we're going to make in this video. What we'll do is we'll open up our file explorer, go to components, and we will make one called light dark toggle.tsx. PS RFC to create the component, and in the JSX here, let's just render out the switch component just like this. That comes from UI. On SVG repo, I found two good SVGs that we can use. I have this sun.svg that we can use for light mode, and then I have this moon.svg that we can use for dark mode. Just to get the sun and the moon imported into this component here, I'll go to where we have our app. Let's take this hamburger, for example. I don't feel like retyping this all because I'm kind of lazy. Get this in here. We'll call this sun. Call this one moon. And I'll make sure we name them accordingly. I think it was just sun.svg and moon.svg. Yep. So sun.svg and moon.svg right here. What we can then do is wrap this switch right here in its own div. And now around it on either side of it, what we're going to do is render the sun on one side, and we will render the moon on the other. And to make this switcher look like a switch with two SVGs on each side in a row format, what we'll do is on this div, just give it a class name of flex, we'll say item center, and gap 2. And then for each of these SVGs, let's give them the class name. We'll just say, I don't know, we'll try size 5. It shouldn't be too big, but just big enough to see. So let's go ahead and add that. Now that we have this, let's go ahead and save it, and let's render it out in our app. Let's go back here. Let's go to app here. And if we go to where we have our drop-downs at, we have this div right here that has the hamburgers. Let's actually render it right here between the hamburger and the last drop-down. We will just say light dark toggle, just like this. making sure to import it. And if we go ahead and save it, here it is on our page. Oh, and I forgot, because we're on dark mode now, let's actually add invert to both of these right here. That way they turn white. Now if we go ahead and save it, here is our actual light mode, dark mode toggle. So we have a sun on the left and a moon on the right, and now we can just toggle between them. I want to make sure that whenever this hamburger is actually on the screen, that this light and dark mode toggle is still aligned to the far right side. Right now it happens to look like it because the spacing is just perfect. However, let's make sure that by wrapping both the hamburger button and the light dark toggle in a div here, just go ahead and give this div a class name of ML auto, so it's spaced to the far right side, and we'll say flex gap for item center just like this. And because we have ML auto here, we won't need it on this hamburger. Let's go ahead and just get rid of that here. And now that should make sure that styling looks good on all screen sizes. Again, still looks the exact same here, but that'll just ensure it stays good when we get bigger. Okay, so that's cool and all. We have the switcher that actually looks functional, but it does literally nothing right now. So let's actually do what we came here to do. And that's making this switcher toggle between light mode and dark mode. How we can do this is kind of up to us, because ultimately there are a few ways we could approach this. Typically, the way I like to handle light mode and dark mode is to wrap my entire app in a provider, which I usually call a theme provider. This provider will have the theme, which is only two options, light or dark, and also a function we can use that will toggle these between each other. The reason why I do it in a provider normally is because sometimes, especially on bigger apps, you might need to know in really deeply nested components whether we're on dark mode or not. Styling in dark mode can get a bit tedious, so I like to make sure every component in my app has the ability to know whether we're in dark mode or not. So I actually lied a second ago when I said we're making the last component, but now we're actually making the very last component, which I will just go ahead and call theme provider. So I'll go up here, components, theme provider.tsx. Go ahead and close out of this. tsrfc to make the component. And at the very top of this file, let's to be explicit here, make a type that I'm going to say is theme. That is either just light or dark. Dark as a string. In terms of the context this provider is actually going to pass down, let's type it right here as type theme context type equals this. And like I said, it'll have two things. Theme, which is of type theme, and then it'll also have toggle theme, which we can just assume is a function that returns void. Now that we have these types, we can just say const theme context equals create context, and we'll make sure this is of theme context type or undefined, and it will default to undefined, making sure to import create context from React. This is the standard way of defining a context always outside of a component. Now that we have this, like all providers, we need to wrap the JSX with the context. So I'll remove this div here. We need to wrap it with theme context.provider like this, and we can put the children inside of here. Children, like in all providers, are just a prop, so we can add to our props here. We can add children, which is always just of type React node. Then we can get children out of here. Again, children's a reserved keyword, of course, and render out children just like this. This theme context provider is going to wrap the entire app, which means that children is literally the entire app. So the entire app is going to have context to whether we're on light mode or dark mode because of this. How we pass that down is actually by giving this a value prop. Right now it's going to say it's missing because we don't have it. So we basically need to give it a prop just like this. Now for this particular value, how I normally do it in a provider and how you normally should do it is just to make a state for it. So we'll say const theme, and this will be set theme. Use state is going to be of type theme, and we're going to default it actually to dark mode to start. And then we'll make an easy function to toggle between the themes. We'll just say const toggle theme. It's going to be a function, and it's going to be super simple. We're just going to call set theme. We're going to get the previous value out of here, and we're going to say if previous equals dark, then when we toggle it, we're going to go to light. Otherwise, we're going to dark. And now that we have this, we have both our theme and our toggle theme, which is exactly what this type expects. So all we have to do is pass in an object for our value and just give it theme and toggle theme like that. And now this provider is all good to go. Again, just to reiterate, this theme provider is going to wrap the entire app, and all it's doing, it looks kind of complicated, but all it's doing really is giving our entire app context to whether we're on light mode or dark mode because of this theme here. And then we give every component technically the ability to change whether we're on light or dark mode with this toggle theme. Now that we have this, we just have to go to main.tsx, which is the entry point for our app. And all we need to do here is just wrap this in a theme provider, just like this. And now our entire app has context to whether we're in light mode or dark mode, depending on what this state is. What we should do now is make a hook to consume the value of this context. Technically, because I'm doing this as just a one-off, I don't have to do this, but I think this is a good pattern to get into. Basically, in whatever file I made my provider, I'll usually export a hook. So in our case, I'll say export const use theme, just like this. It will be a function, like all hooks. And all it's going to do is say const context equals use context, and it's going to use the theme context. Use context should be imported from React. And then we'll completely eliminate the possibility of undefined by just saying if, for whatever reason, context doesn't exist, then we're going to throw a new error saying use theme must be used within a theme provider. And then all we're going to do is return context just like this, and voila, we're good to go. This is actually a pattern that I was taught that I think makes using context really safe and exposes them in a convenient hook. If you try and call use theme now and somewhere where you shouldn't, it'll throw an error. Otherwise, you know you're good. This provider wraps the entire app so everywhere it should be safe, but in general, I think it's a good thing to do. It just makes it so that in every component where I want to use a theme, I don't have to call use context. I can just call this hook and it's already there for me. So basically, wherever I call this now, wherever I call use theme, I can get the theme and the toggle theme out of this context. Now that we have this set up, let's take this and let's actually head back to the light dark toggle. Because we wrote that convenient hook, all we have to do to get these out of here is say const theme, toggle theme just like this, equals use theme, and now we have access to the light mode or dark mode, and we also have the ability to change it between light and dark. This switch right here is going to take in two primary props, checked and onCheck change. For checked, we'll just say it's going to be checked if the theme is equal to dark, because the moon icon is on the right side of the switch. And for onCheck change, meaning whenever we actually click the switcher, all we're going to do is just give it toggle theme. And it's actually really that simple. And now technically, this switch is fully functional. Whenever I'm switching it to the light mode here, we're actually setting this theme in our provider to be light. Whenever it goes to the moon, this is going to switch to being dark. So we have our light and dark mode working correctly in our actual React state. But what good does this actually do? Well, let me show you the magic now and the reason why we did this. If we open up our DevTools here, you can see that from the beginning of the video, we've had this class equals dark on the main body of our HTML. This is what's making our app dark mode right now. If I just completely get rid of this, so I go here, get rid of it, now our app goes into light mode. Pretty cool, right? What this means is that what we need to do is listen for our theme changing. If it changes to dark, we need to add class dark to the root div. If it goes light, we need to remove dark from the root div. So again, if this theme becomes dark, we want it to look like this. The second that it becomes light, then it should go light and remove it. So we just alternate between these two states. And this is actually very easy to do. Let me show you how. We go to our theme provider here. All we have to do in here is just make a use effect, just like this, importing from React, that has theme as a dependency. So we're listening for theme changing. What we'll do is get the root div of our app by just saying const root equals document.document element, just like this. And all we're going to do here is we're going to say if the theme is equal to dark, then what do? Then we just want to say root.classlist.add dark. Else root.classlist.remove dark. And it's really that simple. And just so it's not hard-coded anymore, let's go to index.html. Let's remove this class dark. Completely get rid of it here. Start like this. Now it defaults to light mode here. Let's go ahead and save this div now. We're on dark mode. Click this. Now we go to light mode. Boom. Magic. Every time this toggle is clicked, we're alternating between light mode and dark mode. Now you're most likely wondering how this even works, because I haven't added a single style in this entire app that is dark mode specific. I didn't spend any time using Tailwind, going into components and doing something like the dark selector, where I can go and do dark like this. because you actually can use this if you're on dark mode. It works perfectly fine in Tailwind, but I didn't do that anywhere. So how is this working perfectly? How does my app know to just change every single color on the page based on what the dark class is? Well, let's go to index.css. Go to index.css here, and I can actually show you. If we look in here, something that happened a long time ago is we initialized Часть in our project, and it asked what color palette we wanted to use. After I told it zinc, what it did, and what it always does, is defines a ton of CSS variables that we've seen time and time again. And these are all the CSS variables that we've been using. So we've got a color for background, foreground, card foreground. You get the idea. What you might not have noticed is that under all these CSS variables, but in this same file, we also have at the bottom this dark selector right here. And this is the key. This dark selector right here is a class selector, meaning any element that has dark on it will define all of these CSS variables. If you look right now over here, we're on dark mode. And because of that, we're going to use these CSS variables. And these variables right here are literally all the variables, all the same exact ones that are defined here up top. So essentially, these are going to be the default variables that are used on light mode. However, once we have the dark selector, we use these variables instead. And these are all ones, again, that shadcn set up. So for example, on our cards, when we're on light mode, our cards look like this. That is because the card is using this CSS variable. However, as soon as we go into dark mode like this, because dark is a class selector that is more specific, this card is going to overwrite the other card, so now we're using this color instead. And that is how literally all these other CSS variables work as well. So basically, in summary, we're in light mode, so we default to just using this root here. So all these CSS variables are relative to light mode. Now, when I click dark mode, we now have the dark selector on, so this class is triggered, and now our CSS variables are redefined. And that is what causes all these color changes when I go between light mode and dark mode. Because after all, our card, for example, our card component is using background card. And of course, like I just showed you, background card changes between light mode and dark mode, hence why the cards change color. I am going to 100% recommend this pattern over spamming the dark selector in Tailwind. This pattern here, where you have variables defined up here that just get overridden by a dark selector, is so much cleaner than going in every single component and saying, oh, I want it to look like this on dark mode, and saying dark, BG red 500, like this. It's actually kind of a cool gradient right there, but no, you shouldn't be just spamming dark mode like this. It's fine to use it in some spots if you need to, but if you want to handle the majority of the dark mode styling, do it with CSS variables. Now that we have this understanding, let's clean up a few things between this light mode and dark mode, because clearly not everything is quite perfect yet. So let's go ahead and head over to light mode. So go here. And now if we look, our SVGs aren't really visible. For example, let's look at our additional weather info down here. If we go to where that card actually is, so additional info, and we look at it, remember we have this invert on here that just inverts the colors. If I go in here and I add the dark invert, so we're only inverting when we're on dark mode, then they appear perfectly fine. However, then I have to go and do this in every single SVG that's in dark mode, and I don't want to do this. So what I'll instead do is I'm actually going to remove every single reference in our app to this invert here. So I'm going to search up invert. Let's just see where all it's used. I'm going to get rid of it here, save this file, and basically everywhere it is, we're going to get rid of it because we're going to solve it all with one style instead of spamming it everywhere. This will make things quite a bit simpler. Remove these here. Take this, get rid of this one. Got a couple in here. Let's see. Be right here, and right here. Get rid of all those. Don't need them. And we'll get rid of this one. And now, instead of going individually in every single component and just putting invert wherever we can, what I can instead do is just do it one time. I'll go to index.css, close all these extra tabs here. And all I have to do is just go down here somewhere, and I can actually write a style for this. I'm going to say .dark SVG. So any SVGs that we see that are in dark mode, all we have to do is say filter invert 1. And now that's going to do the exact same thing. So if you notice, these icons still look good on light mode because they're black. If I go to dark mode here, they now look good because they're white. So it's the same thing we were just doing, but I'm doing it in one spot instead of doing it in like 10 different files. Honestly, with where it is right now, I think dark mode looks great. everything looks crisp, the cards look great with their slight gradient, and everything seems to just kind of pop well. However, light mode is a bit of a different beast. It doesn't look horrible, but there are some improvements to be made. First of all, these cards that are on the dashboard and the background color are clashing big time. The cards aren't distinguished from the background pretty much at all, so it almost just looks like one just massive white mesh. And I'll show you exactly why this is. For some reason, I don't know the logic behind this. If you go up here for the top, you can see we have a problem here. Card is 100, so pure white. However, background is also 100, so pure white. So the card and the background are quite literally the exact same color. They're different on dark mode, as you can see here. Card is this 021006, and then background is 0141. So clearly here they're different on dark mode, but on light mode they're the same, which I think looks pretty bad. Generally, when we're in light mode, we want the cards to be slightly darker than the background. This is the opposite of dark mode, where we want the cards to be slightly lighter than the background. So instead of changing the background, let's look at card here. Instead of this being 1, let's make it slightly darker. Let's do, 0.97. So it just very slightly offsets the white. Save it, and now that's a little bit better. It doesn't completely change it, but it makes it at least offset enough to somewhat tell a difference. One more thing that we should add to make it help even more is throwing a border class on this, especially if we're on light mode. So let's go into our card here, and we have no border on it right now. So let's just throw a border like this, go ahead and save it. And now that makes it look even better, just more distinguishable from the background. Having the border helps create some separation between each of the cards so you can see where each one kind of begins and ends. I think it's fair to assume that we don't need this border when we're on dark mode. I think it's a little bit overkill. I mean, it does look kind of okay, but I think we liked it before. So let's just say border like this. When we're on dark mode, we'll just say border none to go without it. There's really no reason to have it on dark mode because there's plenty of separation. It's just more needed on light mode to create that more shadowy effect. If we go ahead and open up our side panel, we're going to notice a couple of problems. Actually, only one main problem really. That being that the slider, not the actual slider itself, but the track for the slider is pretty much invisible. I mean, it's super white against that pretty white background, so it's hard to see. If we head over to the side panel component and we look to see where our slider is, should be actually down here. Our slider's right here. Let's go ahead and control click into it. And if we view it, you'll notice that we have this BG sidebar right here. However, clearly that BG sidebar does not look very good in light mode. So let's keep this BG sidebar if we're in dark mode. But let's make it something different when we're on light mode. We'll instead try BG foreground. So when we're in light mode, use BG foreground. When we're in dark mode, use BG sidebar. Now if we go ahead and save it, the track is actually visible now. However, I can tell right away this looks way out of place and looks way too strong against the background. So let's make this, 25% opacity there. And now I think that is much better. And one thing I want to take a look at right now, especially, is our skeleton loaders. If you just notice right here, our skeleton loaders literally aren't showing up like at all against the white. That's because the color of the skeleton loaders is pretty much white, just like the cards in the background. So it looks really off. That's not a big problem at all though. If we go to our skeleton component here, we can see that normally it is BG accent. Because it looks great on dark mode still, we don't want to change it. Let's say it's still BG accent on dark mode, but on light mode, we're going to do the same thing as our sliders. We're going to say BG foreground /25%. And now, if we go ahead and save it, and we go and test our skeleton loaders, now they should all be visible. At least the ones that are on the dashboard. So let's look at these real quick. Go here. Looks like all these skeleton loaders are showing up exactly the way that they should. It also looks like real quick this current weather card at this particular screen size is not quite the same size for the skeleton loader. Real quick, let me open those. Must have been something we missed. Go to the current skeleton. I believe, oh yeah, it's coming from this MD PB11 here, so we need that in here. Go ahead and copy this. Paste it over. Just fix that real quick. And now they should be the same size. So now these skeleton loaders look and work great. However, if we go back to the side panel here, it looks like they are not quite visible on this card. And I believe that is because if we go to our side card skeleton, we're actually hard coding this background on here. But we only want to do that if we're on dark mode. So let's take dark, the selector here, and let's add it on all of these skeletons, just so only like that on dark mode. But on light mode, we use the regular color. So here, and boom, now the skeleton loaders are great on light mode. And if we go to dark mode, like this. Boom, boom, boom. They also look great. And the very last thing I want to do to make sure this all is perfect is go into responsive mode real quick, shrink down super tiny, and we'll notice right here, we now have this problem of the same thing we had with the hamburger. So let's actually do the same thing we did with the hamburger. Head to our app here, and this light dark toggle. And what I'll do here is I'll actually wrap this light dark toggle in a div. And I'm just going to say, same as the hamburger, it's going to be hidden, but above XS, we can make sure it is block. Now, if I go ahead and save this, it's not going to show up right there. And we'll go into our mobile header component. We will take the light dark toggle, just like this. And let's just go ahead and copy and paste it into here just like this. Import it, save it, and now we have our light mode dark toggle up here when we're on mobile. Just to create a bit more separation, let's just do a gap 8 here. Now they're separated. We have light mode and dark mode on mobile, plus the hamburger on mobile. We go bigger, and of course, it looks the way we want them to. Get out of responsive mode on a big screen, and there they are, still working perfectly. And that, my friends, is going to wrap up this video. It took a long time, but here we are. We started completely from scratch with literally an empty VS Code terminal, and we built an entire app from nothing. An app that interacts with an API, uses modern tech stacks like Tailwind and TanStack Query, and has just about every major thing you need to consider when developing front-end React apps. Of course, it's not 100% without flaw. Like I said, I'm not a graphic designer, so there are certainly improvements that could be made to this. If we wanted to spend 40 hours together on this video, we could have hyper-optimized everything and made it 100% flawless, but I think we've got everything we need to consider this app a done deal. I'll leave it in your hands now if you want to mess around with this code on your own time and make any improvements or changes you want. This entire code base is going to be linked in the description to GitHub, so please feel free to mess around with it or revisit the code if there's parts of it you don't fully understand. This video took me a fat second to make, so I really appreciate all the support for it, and it would mean the world to me if you would consider liking the video and subscribing, as it really helps my channel engagement and helps me grow my audience by helping me out in the YouTube algorithm. Well, with that being said, it's been a fun ride. I hope you guys all found the video helpful. If there's any questions, concerns, criticisms, or anything else that you have, please feel free to leave them in the comments, and I'd be more than happy to respond. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.